Oh, James, I think I broke the Ludenvig.
I think I have a spare H somewhere.
Is that a screw or a length of wood?
Well, it's an extra side panel from the Skardenloft.
Right. Isn't that a land from Kaldheim? We're back.
Oh, lordy.
Back from
Tea?
Kaldheim? Tea Kaldheim. Welcome to the Get Commanded podcast by the Greensboro Commander community. It's the GCP by the GCC, helping you to have better games of Commander. I'm your host, Walt.
And hello, Commander players. It's your other host, James.
And we're back.
Part
James.
2.
Part 2. I actually think this might be the rare occasion where we don't need a transmission.
I know, because we already had it.
Yeah, we heard from the Space Commanders last episode. We know what we're in for.
I know.
Let's just hear it again, just so we can familiarise ourselves.
Refresh our minds, refresh everyone out there listening, yeah.
Alright, here we go, Space Commanders. Tell us what you got.
There are rules that govern the building of Commander decks. Only once you master them can you begin to break them.
I remember we started the last episode with an incredible analogy of your Kung Fu lessons.
Yes.
And you were told that only once you master the rules of Kung Fu, you can actually start doing things outside of those rules.
Yeah, exactly. And so we started to look at the sort of number breakdown that we recommend for your decks and like really emphasizing that this is the beginning point, right?
Yes.
We can always once we know the rules, break them if we know why the rules are the way they are. But in order to know why the rules are the way they are, we have to know them in the first place. We have to know them really, really well. So should we just cover the numbers that we came up with last time?
I think it's an important thing to remind ourselves of,
yes,
for sure.
So when we said lands, we said roughly between 35 and 42. Card draw, which we covered in very great detail.
Very great detail.
We said 10 plus, so minimum 10 bits of card draw. Ramp, we said 10 plus, same thing. And we covered both of those in really, really good detail in the last one.
Yep.
We talked about the different types of ramp. We talked about the different types of card draw. How some card draw would be better than others. And so we kind of counted as like half a slot in our decks.
We even discussed some synergies with specific deck archetypes and shouted out some of our favorite cards.
We did. We talked a lot about Moxfield and how this is going to make our whole journey that much easier. So if you haven't heard that one already, go back and check that one out. But we're sort of moving to the next numbers here. So we have removal, which we haven't talked about yet, which we said 8 to 10 bits of targeted removal. Mm-hmm. So bits of removal that say destroy target or exile target thing, enchantment, artifact, creature, whatever. And we said 1 to 5 mass removal spells or board wipes, sweepers, this kind of thing. So Wrath of God, Cyclonic Rift, things that say Vandal Blast, anything that says do something to all artifacts,
might
all
not be
enchantments.
All creatures, but all something. And then we talked about our win condition and enhancers because they're two separate things.
Yes.
And it's really, it's actually quite hard to define both of them as separate things, but the way we defined it in the last episode was win conditions are cards that help you win the game or come close or eliminate a player. Yeah. And enhancers are cards that push your deck into a new gear. It like gives it that rev up. It's like the nitrous oxide and the fuel. Yeah,
it's the Panharmonicon in the Flicker deck, right?
Exactly.
Is the one we kept on talking about. So we said about 4 win condition cards ideally, and about 5 enhancers ideally. But again, we're going to go into much greater detail on those. So don't worry, you will hear more about that. The other category we talked about, and we did mention that this is one that we sort of emphasize a lot in our decks, but is not one that we see a lot of other people talk about.
It's barely ever spoken about in other deck building templates, so I guess this is the exclusive benefit you get to listening to all those other videos and our podcast as well.
Yep.
It's protection.
Yes, and we said roughly 5 to 10 of these, and these are the spells that are going to protect your board. So
your life total.
Your life total, things that are going to protect a specific creature. Yep. Those are going to be really, really crucial. crucial. We also spoke at great length at the beginning of the last episode about how we're choosing those cards. So specifically, we sort of talked about how certain colors are going to be better at certain things.
Yep.
And that's really important to understand.
One of the biggest things we spoke about was synergy.
Yes.
We'll say this a million more times in this episode as well, I'm sure. Yep. But if a card synergizes with what your deck is doing, it's a great card.
Yes, and specifically your commander as well. That can be, a card can just synergize with your commander, and that can be great.
We also talked about things cards that do multiple jobs. So
and how much we like those.
Are card draw, but also a life gain, or is a board wipe, but also ramp.
Yeah,
that it exists somewhere, surely.
Probably. I mean,
have to use Scryfall for it.
We'll have to go to Scryfall. So let's just get straight into it. We're not going to give the big preamble. It's all in the last episode. Go check it out if you haven't already. Yeah. Let's just dive right in, James. Removal. It's so important.
I know. And this is the thing. We have, obviously, we already said just before that there's single targeted removal and board sweepers, board wipes, mass removal.
Yes.
So let's put our honing lens on and let's go into single target first. I think this is pretty easy to define. Again, it is something that removes one thing.
Yes.
Or maybe in some situations, 2 targets.
Yeah. I think it's we call it single target, but I think even if it's removing 2 to 3 things, that still counts. So right off the top of my head, Soul Shatter is a card from Kaldheim I really like. It's a 3-mana instant that says each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker with the highest mana value among creatures and planeswalkers they control. So that is a 1 card that removes 3 things, but it doesn't say all creatures or all anything. So we know it's not mass removal, but it's still dealing with specific targeted things. So that's still kind of under this category. I would say, we sort of talked last episode about how some cards can be kind of half a point in our numbers, because again, we want to hit at least 7 bits of single target removal. Soul Shatter is interesting, and also cards like Merciless Executioner and Plague Crafter. Yep. These are cards that will make our opponents remove some of their creatures, but they don't deal with a specific creature.
And we don't target them. And this is the thing. If a card says target, obviously we hate, if we've got a card that says target, we hate seeing Hexproof and Shroud on our opponent's stuff.
Of course.
But it is important that we are able to target the problematic stuff that hits the board.
Yeah, so generally stuff that does just go, do this to target enchantment or target artifact is going to be great. Look, again, we're going to emphasize, we've talked about it before, but colors is super important. Most of the commander decks we're playing are going to be roughly 2 colors. Yep. So know which of your colors is better at the thing that you're going to do. So
exactly.
In terms of removal specifically, white removes everything.
I'm so glad that we're actually giving the color white, the props it deserves now, because in the last episode we talked about card draw and we went through the colors and we made a very funny joke about the cricket noises were chirping for the white for the white colors, but for card draw, that's totally true. Removal, white is phenomenal.
Yeah, I think I've told you I've tallied up the number of colors represented across my commander decks, how many of my decks run white and a color, or at least one white color.
Yeah.
My top colors, one of them was white, and I think it's because I really love the ability to answer my opponent's things, and white is just so good at this. There's going to be some really great rates that we're going to get on removing artifacts and enchantments. Disenchant is a perfectly serviceable card.
Perfect.
1 and a white, it's an instant that says destroy target artifact or destroy target enchantment. That's fantastic. That's exactly what we want to be doing.
Removes the problem on the board. Obviously, the 2 main staples for creature removal in white are the 2 1-mana instant speed spells that exile a creature.
Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares.
Yep. One, Path to Exile, the creature that you exile, the owner, the controller, gets a basic land from their deck and puts it onto the battlefield tapped. Swords to Plowshares gains them life equal to that creature's toughness.
Yeah, but there's sort of a trade-off that we're willing to have here.
For 1 white mana at instant speed, wow, I'm fine with them getting a basic on their battlefield. That's fine.
Exactly right. The efficiency is just too good to not to resist. We also, in white, though, get access to some really cool cards that just destroy a permanent. So Generous Gift, for instance.
Yep.
is just like, yeah, 3 mana. It's 3 mana, which we'll talk about a little bit about sort of like mana value and how sort of we prefer lower in general. But also we really like spells that can deal with anything. And Generous Gift is like premium. For 3 mana, it's an instant. For 2 and a white, destroy target permanent. Its controller makes a 3/3 elephant. And again, we don't care about that elephant. It's the fact that for 3 mana, we can answer anything on someone's
also,
board.
like, I know it's a touchy subject, but removing lands in a mass way, if you're playing Armageddon, that will upset people. But there are problematic lands out there, and we'll talk about this soon. But like, being able to destroy anything means you can hit a land, and if someone's got a Maze of Ith or something like that, and it's hosing you can hit it.
Yeah, there are some lands in our format that are absolutely game-breaking. We mentioned in the last episode Gaia's Cradle.
Yes.
Like, we know that card takes over games. You mentioned Maze of Ith, that's another one.
Academy Ruins.
Academy Ruins is a good one. I had another one before, Glacial Chasm, I think it's called.
Oh yeah, interesting.
The one that has like cumulative upkeep, pay 2 life, but creatures can't deal damage to you or can't attack you or whatever.
It's wild.
Like, crazy strong card. So yes, it's going to be helpful to deal with lands occasionally, and yeah, white, if it's in your commander's color identity.
That's where your removal is.
Yeah, if you're playing Azorius, if you're playing Selesnya, you get access to like the best removal.
So already, just before we go on to the other colors, well, I want to kind of highlight, you've just said Azorius, and I kind of want to make a kind of comparison here. When we talked about card draw, we laughed at how bad white is at card draw, but we gave blue the props of how good blue is at card draw. If you're in Azorius colors and you need to fill these requirements of at least 10 minimum card draw spells and 7 removal spells, you know which colors are going to do which job.
Yeah,
because
totally.
White is really good at removing and blue is really good at drawing cards. So there you go. You now know in what filter to use on your Scryfall search and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, you know in the binders which pages to flick through when you're going into trade.
Exactly right. And I think this is the cool thing about Magic in general is like when you're first starting out, learning all these like lingo for the color combinations and stuff and like what color combinations do what can feel really overwhelming. But as you learn more about it, you start to appreciate how intricate and fantastic the game we play is.
There's a philosophy behind it.
Yeah. So like when you combine 2 colors together, the things that color can do combined with another color are actually sort of compounded. Like it's not just blue's card draw plus white's removal. It's like, no. Now you get cards that do kind of both things. So like, you know, like you get a spell like Absorb. Right?
Oh, such a good example.
Right? A 3 mana instant that counters a spell and gains you 3 life. Like, you are getting to do the thing that blue does really well, which is countering spells, and you're gaining some life, and you're doing it on the same card. So this Magic is full of these beautiful intricacies of like, oh wow, like when I combine 2 colors together, I don't just get cool blue cards and cool white cards, I get cool, well, we call them gold cards, right?
Yeah.
Blue and white cards and green and white cards and red and white cards. Like you find these really interesting overlaps. And so yeah, as we're talking about removal and which colors do what, keep in mind that when you intersect colors, and we're going to talk about this, when you intersect colors that are both good at doing something, you get even better at that thing that it's doing.
Spoiler alert, black is also really good, and when you combine black and white with a removal, you get the premium removal.
Absolute best removal in the format, basically, yeah. But let's not jump ahead of the game.
Let's go through Woobug. So let's leave black. Let's go to blue now.
Yep.
Blue's pretty decent at removal. It's really good with like bouncing stuff as removal.
Yes, and for creatures, that's probably mostly the best that we're going to be able to do. There's a couple of exceptions. It's blue's sort of in an interesting spot where it's getting better and better at dealing with creatures. Like 3-4 years ago, you could pretty comfortably say like, oh, blue doesn't really deal with creatures, but now it's like, okay, we have our rapid hybridization and Pongify and reality shift.
Destroy target creature on a blue card, which is huge. But there's now also that blue board wipe as well that is destroy all creatures. The Zalfir.
I think we'll talk about when we talk about board wipes, but there's like the phasing of Zalfir, like where it's a saga, but it has read ahead, so you can jump straight to a chapter. And chapter 3 is just destroy all creatures. I think its controllers make a 2/2 wizard or a 2/2 something for each creature destroyed this way. But it's a blue card that says destroy all creatures on it, which we thought would never happen, right?
Exactly. And this is the thing. I think blue is, getting the attention from mummy and daddy at Wizards that it deserves. But it's really good at bouncing creatures. Blue's pretty decent at sometimes hitting artifacts. It just straight up can't do enchantments. That's something that it's terrible at.
Can't do it at all. Yeah.
Obviously, you can bounce target permanent in some situations, but it's usually very typed. Like, it's either like bounce target artifact or creature.
And I think In 60 card formats and 1v1 formats, the ability to bounce something from someone is going to be much stronger than in Commander, because in a 1v1 format, the tempo that you're going to get when someone casts a 5-drop and you cast your unsummon, which just returns the 5-drop creature to its owner's hand, you are gaining like tempo, which is really relevant in 60 card formats, but not so much in Commander, where we kind of want to deal with stuff more permanently, ideally. I'm totally with you. It totally doesn't do enchantments, but it also does something really interesting, which is still removal, I think we both agree, which is it interacts on the stack. So like counter spells, we talked about Absorb, but there's also just spells just like Counterspell and like Mana Drain. These just say counter target spell. So yeah, when the permanent or creature or enchantment, when that's on the battlefield, it's not going to deal with it. But when it's on the stack, that counterspell is as good as our disenchant, right? For
exactly
Heuristic Study.
It's the same rate you're using, but it doesn't even hit the board. So in my opinion, sometimes counterspells are better, because if someone's in an Enchantress deck, they might have some Constellation where an enchantment triggers something. Constellation's a really fun mechanic in Enchantress decks, but you don't even allow it to hit the board. So they don't even get that value. So blue's really good at removal, but it removes in very different ways.
Yes, mostly on the stack, I would say. And then in sort of interesting other ways. And we will go into as well, like, our favourite removal spells in each colour.
Correct, yeah. Black. Fantastic at removal.
Yes. Black is, like, especially good at creatures. Black is like pretty much the only color where you'll get cards that just say destroy target creature on them. I don't think...
Murder is a great example.
Yeah, Murder is just like the quintessential black card. Destroy target creature. It's a 3-mana instant. We get like the cards that we're going to want to play more in Commander are more the ones that have like very slight hoops to jump through. Like, what's the one that was printed recently? Infernal Grasp, right? For 1 and a black, destroy target creature, you lose 2 life. We don't care about 2 life when we have playing a 40 life format, right?
It's instant speed. It's very quick and efficient.
Yes. Yeah. So creatures and planeswalkers, we're going to be able to remove so well. We talked about like sacrificing, like forcing people to sacrifice creatures. That's going to deal with a lot of problems as well.
That actually is a really interesting one to note, because obviously white does a lot of targeted stuff, whereas black can force these sacrifices with like the Soul Shatter, with Fleshbag Marauder is another card. This gets around Hexproof and Shroud.
Yeah, there's instances where this can be better. It's true, yeah. It can't do artifacts or enchantments. There is one exception, which I think we talked about last episode.
I think we've talked about it in a couple of episodes.
Yeah, we talked about this, all the color pie and how it works. But Feed the Swarm is like the one black card that deals with enchantments. If you are in only black, I think it's worth running Feed the Swarm, because it's going to be your only answer for that really problematic enchantment, like Omniscience or something like that.
Best thing about Feed the Swarm as well, it's really cheap. It's even for new players. It's not like we're telling you to go buy a Force of Will, which is a free counter spell and about $100. Feed the Swarm is a couple of, like, not even $1.
Yeah, exactly. But so black is going to do creatures, planeswalkers, great. Sacrificing creatures and stuff, great. Not so much artifacts or enchantments. That's going to be something it's going to struggle with. Moving through the colors, we have red. Red can also do creatures and planeswalkers like black, but it generally does it not through destroying it, but through like burn spells. So like Lightning Bolt, right? Deals 3 damage to any target. Against a planeswalker that has 3 loyalty, that's as good as destroying the planeswalker.
Against a creature with 3 toughness, that's just as good as destroy target creature.
Yeah, exactly right. Burn spells have the upside of also being able to do damage to your opponents, which can be really, really helpful. Generally, though, there's obviously the downside of, things with a lot of toughness you're gonna struggle to get burn through to killing them. Like, if someone resolves an Apex Devastator, that's a 10/10. It's going to be pretty hard for you to find a red spell that's going to deal 10 that you're going to want to cast, basically.
Yeah, God, there's a lot. You'd have to cast like a big X spell and pump a lot of mana into that.
Yeah.
But yeah, red is generally doing damage-based removal stuff, but it also can get rid of artifacts pretty well.
Really well.
Vandal Blast is a great modal one where it is destroy target artifact an opponent controls, but it has an overload cost, which then turns it into a mass removal.
Yeah, spell. Exactly. That's we talked about a lot about the cards that intersect stuff, so that's a really good example of one that's your targeted removal and your mass removal. Red also can't do enchantments, though. Just can't do it.
Yeah, no, there isn't a single card that does it.
Well, there's one, which is the exception to every red rule, and it's Chaos Warp.
Oh, I mean, that's that's one of those cards where, it does remove it, but there is a chance it goes horribly, horribly wrong for you. If you don't know Chaos Warp, it's 2 and a red for an instant speed spell that's The owner of Target non-land permanent
yes.
shuffles it into their library and then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent, put it onto the battlefield. So look, in terms of red getting rid of anything, that's awesome. It's Target non-land permanent. You can hit
an enchantment, right?
You can hit an enchantment.
Otherwise you can't do in red.
Exactly. It's the feed the swarm of red.
Yes,
exactly. It does that. However, I have been in games where I have gone...
We've both been in games.
Yes. It's always happened. You go, oh, that Draneth Magistrate sure is frustrating. I can't cast spells anywhere else but my hand. I'm going to Chaos Warp that. And you Chaos Warp it. And they, yeah, sure, okay, fantastic. They shuffle that Draneth Magistrate into their library, put the deck down. They even offer you to cut the deck, so to make sure that you're not cheating.
And you're choosing your own fate.
Yeah, and you cut the deck, you give them their top card of library, and then they reveal, I don't know, an Avacyn Angel of Hope, which makes all of their permanents indestructible. Yes. And you're like, oh... cool, I made it worse. Whoops.
Or an Ulamog, yes. Against certain decks, Chaos Warp's going to get a lot worse because the things that you can flip are going to be bad. But
just think about what deck you're playing against when you cast that Chaos Warp. You should include it in a red deck, though.
You totally should. It's really, really good. And again, you should consider the colors that you're in. And so if you're in colors like red and black, where, if you're in Rakdos, you don't have any cards that deal with enchantments except for Feed the Swarm and Chaos Warp. So in that deck, 100% run Feed the Swarm and Chaos Warp. Those are your answers. Yeah.
100%.
Absolutely.
And there you go. And then that's 2 out of the 7 that you need to fill. So you're really getting those spots quite easily just by listening to this little section of our podcast.
It's true. Well, that's red. That's mostly what red can do. Green also sits in a bit of a weird spot. It's kind of like blue. Traditionally, green has always been really good at dealing with artifacts and enchantments, right? We get Naturalize, Return to Nature. Spells that just destroy artifacts and enchantments. There's even creatures these days that like ETB and exile creatures and enchantments. They're rare, artifacts and enchantments. They're rare, but it does happen. Doesn't traditionally remove creatures, certainly not in a way that says destroy your target creature. We do get a lot of fight effects.
Yeah, one of my favorite examples of this, actually, I want to shout out a deck I've recently built that is it's a mono-green deck that's really good at getting rid of creatures.
I know what you're talking about.
It's my Ayula Queen Among Bears deck, because every time a bear enters the battlefield, Ayula says either put 2 counters, +1 counters on a target bear, or target bear fights another creature. And you can just, if you're clever with the sequencing of your plays, you can just remove any creature on your opponent's board every time a bear enters the battlefield.
It's shockingly efficient, actually. Having played against it, I think I sort of imagined that because the bears are 2/2s, when they're ETBing, you're sort of like, oh, well, there's not going to be much that he's going to want to fight. Because fight, the creatures deal damage equal to their power to each other. So if you've got a 2/2 bear, the only thing you're going to be able to kill without killing your bear is 1 toughness and not 1 power.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Not 2 power. But the thing that Ayula says is whenever a bear ETBs, target bear fights target creature, it doesn't say it has to be the bear that just entered the battlefield.
Correct.
So you can do it. So you cast a bear, and that bear's a 2/2, but you can have your Ayula, which might be an 8/8, fight a creature.
Yeah.
And that's going to kill most of the board.
And it's funny, I built this deck at a time where my partner actually built a Kraken tribal deck, right?
Yes.
And it's huge Krakens, they're like 9/9s when they enter. But in a mono green deck that traditionally can't remove creatures with a spell, now can remove these really problematic blue and black monsters just by fighting them.
Yes. So if you're in mono green, fight is going to be really, really good. Again, the way your colors are going to intersect, if you end up in green and black, probably don't run fight stuff because the black's going to be better.
Yeah.
If you're in green and white, probably don't run the fight stuff because your white creature removal is going to be better. As always, there are exceptions, and the exceptions are usually, as we've said, synergy. If there's
Around my commander with Ayula is a great example.
Yeah, and if you're playing a Gruul, there's a Gruul commander, I forget what it's called, but it cares about fighting. I think it's called Naeth or something like that.
Oh yeah.
It actually cares about when you fight creatures. So in that deck, you probably would rather have the fight stuff rather than the burn spells to deal with creatures, because you're synergizing with your commander when you fight, right? So that's going to be more important.
I will give green another shout out that it does have a couple of those universal destroy target permanent style effects. Beast Within is a really good example of those cards.
Kind of color pie break a little bit, but that's the way Wizards is sometimes.
Sometimes they print those cards that people just go, this doesn't agree with the philosophy of our game.
I think they've actually since stated that Beast Within was a mistake. They've actually specifically said... they wish they hadn't done that. So that's interesting.
Yeah, well, there you go. If you want to
it exists, so play it if you can.
And it's cheap too. Go grab it.
100%.
Should we talk about multicolor quickly as well?
Yeah, so we've sort of touched on this a couple of times. But yeah, you're generally going to get not just the best removal from those colors when you combine them, you're going to get better then. So yeah, like we said, Orzhov, black and white. When you combine black and white together, you get even better removal. You're going to get cards like...
Utter End, which is just exile target permanent. Vindicate.
Yeah, exiles are permanent. Like, these are so good. Azorius counterspells are going to be some of the best counterspells that we find.
Yeah.
Dovin's Veto says counter target non-creature spell. The spell can't be countered. It's fan-friggin-tastic. It's a 2-mana counterspell that you can't counter. It's so good.
Yeah.
Golgari, you're going to get like a really strong intersection of destroying permanents. We get stuff like Assassin's Trophy. Destroys anything for 2 mana. And they get a basic. Again, we've talked about it with Path to Exile. Does not matter that we give them a basic. We can get anything on the battlefield.
Yeah.
So strong.
Something else that Golgari does, which is really interesting, because it's got that like green, like black graveyard recursion theme, is it doesn't want your opponents to do what it does. So there's this really cool thing on a lot of Golgari cards that say destroy target creature, it can't be regenerated.
Yeah.
Now regenerate is an ability where it has a cost. The cost might be different. It might be discard a card or pay a certain mana cost.
Or sacrifice a creature.
Sacrifice a creature. But basically if you regenerate something, the next time this creature would be destroyed, instead, so it completely replaces the destruction of the creature in any way it's going to get destroyed, and it just taps the creature.
Yep.
That's it. It just completely negates it.
Removes it from combat, I think, which is kind of a weird little interaction, but yeah.
Back when Magic was ridiculously unnecessarily complicated. But yeah, it's got a really cool like little thing that Golgari does really, really well in black and green.
Almost all Golgari removal spells say can't be regenerated. Yeah.
Another really good shout out for a Golgari card that I love in Commander. It's not fantastic, but it's pretty decent. It's 1 black and a green. It's a card called Maelstrom Pulse. Destroy target permanent. Destroy target non-land permanent and destroy all other non-land permanents with the same name.
I think this card is played like a lot in limited formats, obviously, where we're going to see...
the same card over and over again.
Yeah, we're going to see 4 copies of a card, or sometimes more than 4 copies of a card, so this spell's going to be great.
Yeah.
I have heard you really talk it up before, though, for Commander. Do you want to talk about why you think it's so strong?
Look, I think it's so strong because we've already mentioned a ton of staples in Commander that everybody runs.
Yeah.
Like Sol Ring, Arcane Signet for your ramp, like these are mana rocks that everyone runs. And sometimes just blowing up a Sol Ring, and if you hit 2 Sol Rings, feels pretty good. If there's 2 Sol Rings at a table, feels pretty nice.
That's interesting. I didn't think about that interaction. If one person has a Sol Ring and someone else has a Sol Ring, even though we're still playing Singleton, your Maelstrom Pulse blows up both Sol Rings. That's already a pretty great synergy.
It is fantastic, but this is the reason I keep running it in decks that have black and green, is usually in a pod, someone is playing a token strategy. It's very common. I don't know if it's just common with the circles that I play in, the store I play at, or something, or if I just hang around you too much. But if you hit a token, the token has a name, and every other token of the same name will be destroyed with Maelstrom Pulse. So that 1/1 soldier, all other 50 soldiers that person has, gone.
Absolutely.
Instantly. It's so good.
I think the other thing that they're increasingly printing on cards, there's 2 effects, and both of them are hit really hard by Maelstrom Pulse. One of them is clone effects.
Oh, yeah.
Anything that enters the battlefield as a copy of something else often has the same name. So, if you cast your Clever Impersonator and you have you make it a Sol Ring, it has the name Sol Ring, usually. And so if you blow up a Sol Ring with Maelstrom Pulse, it blows up the Clever Impersonator as well.
It's
strange
really
interaction.
Nice. Yeah.
The other one that they do a lot these days is they have these weird cards that say, like, when you cast a creature spell of a certain type, copy it. And the copy specifically becomes a token.
But it's got the same name.
Has the same name. So, yeah, like suddenly, against your Volo... decks that get copies of everything, then suddenly it's like, I know you're having fun over there with your 4 Muldrifters. I'm going to Maelstrom Pulse those. Yeah.
I think, Maelstrom Pulse is one of these things that will get debate going of if it is good in Commander or not.
Yeah.
I'll take the stance happily, and I'll debate with anyone in the comments that it is a good card in Commander.
For sure.
Now, I think probably we've gone through the color pie, we've talked about multicolored spells, but I think we should really hammer home of why we need to run at least 7 targeted pieces of removal.
For sure.
There is a lot of problematic stuff in Commander. And when I say problematic, I mean things that are about to win the game or stopping you from winning the game.
Or even just like so strong that the value someone will get from them will win them the game as well.
Yes, yeah.
Let's talk about like, so we sort of broken down like which permanent types things are good at and emphasized that, you know, like hitting multiple things is really, really strong. Strong artifacts that you're going to want to hit when they come down. A Chroma's Memorial.
Oh, it's 7 mana, which is big, but it gives all of your creatures protection from black and red and first strike and haste.
It's a stupid number of abilities.
It's a keyword soup. It's really good. Get rid of it if it hits the board.
Absolutely, you should. Scroll Rack. Against a lot of decks that are going to be playing Scroll, like EDHREC decks, for instance.
Yep.
They're going to be putting massive spells on top of their library, revealing them with EDHREC, making you take a bunch of damage. You're going to want to get rid of Scroll Rack as soon as you see it, basically, against those decks.
Yep. Aetherflux Reservoir. Yeah. Aetherflux Reservoir has a nickname in Magic, and it's called the Death Star, because basically what it does, it kills a player instantly.
Yep.
It has this activated ability that it says pay 50 life. I know, pay 50 life. It sounds like a big reach, but there are life gain decks out there that get to 50 life in a blink.
Yes.
Pay 50 life and you deal 50 damage to any target.
Yep. And it just ends games. It also has a very, very, very good ability on it, which says whenever you cast a spell, gain a life for each spell you've cast this turn.
So it gains you the life you're going to use to blow up someone anyway.
Absolutely crazy good card. And yeah, in a life gain deck where people are going to be gaining, 40, 50 life at a time, we're going to need to get rid of that as soon as we see it. Let's talk about enchantments as well.
There are lots of these.
There are lots of these. We've mentioned Ristic Study about 1 million times. One we actually, get rid of that if you see it, absolutely. One we haven't mentioned actually that much, even though we talked about treasures when we talked about ramp. Smothering Tithe, absolute staple of our format.
True.
That card just runs away with the game if we don't deal with it. So it's an enchantment for 3 and a white.
Yep.
Whenever an opponent draws a card, they may pay 2. If they don't, you create a treasure.
Now, again, I in the last episode, I said how I love being that person that says, do you pay the 1 for Ristic Study? Saying the Ristic Study one now doesn't feel as bad since Smothering Tithe has come out, because paying 2 is a lot more, and you genuinely draw a lot of cards in Commander.
You realise when a Smothering Tithe is down how much of your turn you spend drawing cards, because you're suddenly like, oh my god, I just drew 3 cards. I can't pay 6. I guess James is going to have 3 treasures on his next turn. That's crazy.
And we didn't even mention it in the ramp section of our last episode, but it is a fantastic piece of ramp. It's
absolutely outstanding. Yeah, you got to deal with that if you see it. Can you think of any others?
A card that you hate and I'm going to make you cringe is Rest in Peace. I know. I'm sorry. It's okay.
The real moral of the episode is just don't play Rest in Peace.
For those that don't know, Rest in Peace is a 2-mana enchantment that says all graveyards are exiled.
Yep.
And anything that is meant to go to the graveyard is exiled instead. So if you're playing a graveyard strategy, you are going to want to be able to remove Rest in Peace. Otherwise, you are screwed.
Yes. If you are running like most graveyard decks are running black, right? Like that's just like the color of your graveyard stuff.
Shout out to our buddy Feed the Swarm once again.
Yes, I was just gonna say, like, that's gonna be why you're gonna want Feed the Swarm so much. There's a bunch of other enchantments, but we also obviously gonna see creatures. It's gonna be a super common one. Obviously, other people's commanders are going to get out of hand super commonly. Tulane, Corvold, we mentioned these exactly in the last episode.
But literally anyone's commander is a good removal target for your 7 pieces of target removal, because that's what they've built their deck around.
Yep.
So if you remove it, you're going to slow them down. They're probably going to want to spend their next turn recasting it, which is probably their entire turn.
Yep.
So good target.
Yep. You're always going to want to have creatures that you're going to want to remove. There's also creatures that we see like more commonly in the 99 that we're going to want to deal with when we see them. You mentioned Drannith Magistrate is a good one. Notion Thief. Ooh. I know you in particular. I think my hate of Rest in Peace is probably equaled by your hate of Notion Thief.
Yeah, when we did our community Q&A and we said name a card in each color that should be banned, I broke the rules for blue and added black to the color identity, because Notion Thief is black.
He hates
and
it that
blue.
much.
It sucks. It's a flash creature, firstly, so you can cast it at instant speed, and it basically says anytime your opponents would draw a card except the first card they draw for return, you draw a card instead.
Yeah,
it's just like, oh, you want to cast that massive card draw spell, that Pull from Tomorrow, where you paid your entire mana base into?
Yep.
Lol. here's 4 mana that I spent. I'm going to draw 18 cards. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Because it has flash. You can flash it in response to someone drawing the cards. Yeah, it's a really strong
So if
card.
that hits the table, yes, it does the great thing in response and you can't deal with it that turn, whatever, and you cry because they've just drawn a bunch of cards on your mana.
Yeah.
But you need to get rid of that creature.
Yes.
So this is why we have 7 pieces of targeted removal.
Yes, exactly right. James, I feel like you probably want to talk about specifically lands that we have to deal with. Because you said before, you really like having removal that can deal with lands.
Yeah.
There's lands that when we see, we're going to want to deal with, and we sort of mentioned already, Gaia's Cradle, Academy Ruins, Maze of Ith. These lands are going to run away with the game if they're used in the right circumstance. I think it's good to have, at least one?
I think, look, it's one of these things that people get really touchy about because there's this unspoken rule in Commander of don't touch my lands.
Yes.
If you go on EDHREC, which is, we've mentioned it before, great database for Commander, tells you all the cards. There's this salty ranking that they give cards.
Yeah, the salt score, yeah.
There are so many destroy all land effects in that.
Yes.
And it's because, the reason why they get such a high rating is because it's destroy all lands. However, destroying one land, there's not many salty cards that say destroy target land or destroy target permanent.
Yes.
It's because, you're just putting someone out 1 mana, or even Maze of Ith doesn't even tap for mana. So, you're not even putting them out of mana, really. So they don't get salty at that. And I can guarantee you that there are lands that will win games. Academy Ruins is one that I mentioned before, but it puts an artifact from your graveyard back on top of your library. So if you combine this with a card like Mindslaver, which is a card where you can pay 4 mana and sacrifice it, so it goes to the graveyard, you take control of someone's next turn, then you return it to the top of your library with Academy Ruins, cast it again next turn, sacrifice it and do it again. Yep. You basically control someone for the rest of the game if you do that.
You definitely can. So yes, if you are playing against that player and you see the Academy Ruins, it's going to be good to have at least one card in your deck, I think, one of your targeted removal slots that lets you go, I'm getting rid of that land, I hate it.
100%.
It's bad, yes. And so we sort of mentioned a couple of these already. I think, having spells that say destroy target land can be helpful, and if your one slot is that's totally fine. But we also really like the ones that just say destroy target permanent. So Beast Within,
Generous Gift.
These are great because they're just going to let you do that if you have to.
If you're in the right colors for it, you may as well run them. Now, before we move on to mass removal,
sure.
We've talked about it in the other 2 sections that we've discussed previously of ramp and card draw. Something that we have to consider when we're looking at cards to include in our deck. Because there's, Generous Gift is fantastic. But is there a better version of removal for my deck that has white?
Yeah.
Does it, again, here's the word, synergize with my deck? So there's a bunch of cards that Walt and I love in certain strategies. I said white first because one of my favorite removal spells that I only use in this deck, it's terrible in any other deck, it's Wanderer's Strike. It's 4 or 5 mana. It's instant speed, so that's pretty decent.
Yeah.
But it's exile target creature, but it also has proliferate on it.
Right.
So I run it in my Atraxa Infect deck
because
it deals with the creature that's problematic. I have to spend a bit more mana, but I also proliferate, so I might just kill a player as well, maybe.
Yeah, this is sort of the removal equivalent of your Tezzeret's Gambit that we were mentioning in the last episode.
Exactly right. Two examples from the same deck that just say proliferate, and therefore I run in the deck above other spells that do it maybe more efficiently or more generically, but because it synergizes with my deck, I run that instead.
Yeah. I do think you're going to have a little bit more fun overall when you're prioritizing these types of removal that are specifically fun in your deck, because it sort of feels less like you're just chasing the best cards, right? Yes, your Path to Exile and your Swords to Plowshares are amazing, but if you spend all of your deck building just chasing those cards, you sort of feel like there's an end destination, right? Eventually you'll arrive somewhere where you have all the best cards and you've got nowhere you can go from there.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're looking at synergistic cards, you can find cards like Crush Contraband, right?
You want to tell me what that does? I actually don't know the card.
Sure. For 3 and a white, it's an instant. It says, choose one. Exile target artifact, exile target enchantment, or exile target artifact and target enchantment.
Oh, wow.
So for 4, you're dealing with 2 things, which is kind of like a really cool rate.
Yeah.
But in certain decks, like my Tygam deck, that cares about rebounding spells,
that's so good.
that's not 4 mana deal with 2 things. That's 4 mana deal with 4 things. Because now I'm getting to go on my second main phase. Tygam's attacked. I cast Crush Contraband, exile 2 things. It rebounds. In my upkeep, cast it again, exile 2 more things for 4 mana.
Yeah, that's even... And, like, look, you can say, like, oh, yeah, but you can run other 1-drop spells in that deck. That's more efficient, Walt. But, yeah, maybe it's slightly more efficient, but that's 2... Or, like, 1 mana deal with 2 things. Sure. But this is 4 mana deal with 4 things.
And on 1 card
Exactly.
as well.
That's the big thing. I really like that as an example. One of my favorites is, synergizes with like recursion decks in graveyards.
Yeah.
Cards like Fleshbag Marauder or cards like Ravenous Chupacabra is actually probably a little bit better because it's target.
Yes.
Fleshbag Marauder, it forces your opponent to sacrifice a creature, so they just choose. They might just have a chumpy token that they can just sacrifice, but Ravenous Chupacabra is 2 black, destroy target creature when it enters the battlefield.
Yes, so in any deck where you're going to be often recurring cards from your graveyard, Chupacabra, even though like the amount of mana you're paying to destroy that creature is going to be better because that's a spell. Like imagine if you were playing a deck where, you know, your Deadly Rollick was being used multiple times. Like that would make Deadly Rollick, which is already a fantastic card, even better because Deadly Rollick just exiles a creature for free if you have your commander. So already a fantastic card, but imagine if your Deadly Rollick said exile target creature and then
do it again in 2 turns.
Yeah, at the beginning of your upkeep, return it to your hand. How busted would that card be? And that's kind of how Chupacabra functions in like a Merrin deck, right?
Oh, that is literally straight. And wow, if you have 4 experience counters, it's just at the beginning of your end step. Do it again.
Yeah.
Like if you can sacrifice it, put it in bin. You do 2 things with 1 card.
Yes,
it's so
exactly. I think it's interesting. That's sort of like a way that you can think about synergy is like, yeah, hitting multiple targets is going to be great when you can recur the spell. And when you can recur the creature, just having it on the creature is going to be great. So like Chupacabra does it in black. In white, I've actually started playing this card. I just put it in some of my decks. I'm going to try it. In my Reese deck, which kind of has a flicker sub-theme where you exile a creature and bring it back to the battlefield. So you sort of abuse ETB effects. There's a card called Luminate Primordial. Are you familiar with this card?
So is it part of the Primordial
It's part
cycle?
of the Primordial cycle. So it's a 7-drop, like the other ones. It's the white one. So it's 5 white.
Well, this is why I've never heard about it before.
It's the white one?
It's the white one.
It's a 4/7, I think. So like a fine rate. It's not fantastic. When it enters the battlefield, for each opponent, exile up to 1 target creature that player controls. They gain life equal to its power. So Swords to Plowshares, which we mentioned, right,
it's
is a 1-drop.
repeatable Swords to Plowshares.
Well, and it exiles 3 things when it ETBs. For each opponent, you cast a Swords to Plowshares. So yeah, you're paying way more mana, but when you've got the ability to get that creature to enter the battlefield again and again, suddenly you're going like, yeah, I'm going to cast 6 versions of Swords to Plowshares.
So if you cast Ephemerate on that.
Yeah, you've gone like, okay, I already did Swords to Plowshares 3 times from this ETB.
Yeah.
I'm going to do it again. I've just got, for 7 mana, I've just cast 6 Swords to Plowshares with 2 cards. You know what I mean? Like this is the upside you get when you play Synergy, I think.
That's really, really strong. Look, I've actually written a note for myself at the bottom of this page.
I did see this.
Of a single target removal. When we were like putting together this advice, I was like, I have Magic decks on my desk, even at my job that I like at my office in my office. And as I was putting together like these pieces of advice, I was looking at some of my decks and I was going, I should be running more synergistic removal in some of my decks. I'm really proud of like the synergy that I have in Atraxa because it has proliferate written on the card and that's what I want to do. But there are other decks that I have that could be better functioning if the removal synergized with what the deck wanted to do.
Yeah.
So like I've had a bit of a look and even after writing this, I've gone back and tweaked some things and there's some decks now, again, like the Ayula one was really fun to build actually after I wrote this piece for the podcast.
It was a slightly different slant. Yeah. So I think like we're going to come back to this, but like try stuff. You know, if you're used to all your removal being super efficient and super, you know, just like the best spells in the format, try something that's like a little less efficient but a little more synergistic. And I promise you, in the right pod, you'll have a blast because you will cast a removal spell and then it'll do some upside wacky thing. You know, you'll cast I forget what it's called, but there's a Selesnya destroy target artifact or enchantment for 2 mana. It's an instant, but it says populate on it.
Oh, that's so good.
So, you know,
make another 10-10 worm. Go for your life.
Exactly,
what a great,
exactly. And that's going to be really fun. So I think we've sort of covered like how target removal is going to work, the colors it's going to work best in. We also did say, in addition to those 7 bits of target removal, we're going to want to play some wraths, some board wipes. So
get rid of everything.
Yes, anything that we said that would deal with all of something. So, you know, bounce all non-land permanents, return all of their hands.
Destroy all creatures.
Destroy all enchantments, destroy all artifacts and enchantments, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
We did say at least 1. I think we said 1 to 5.
We did say 1 to 5, but I'm going to kind of stress that 2 to 3 is where most of my decks sit at.
I think I'm probably the same, actually.
Yeah,
I think it's a bit of a sweet spot.
And I think generally you're going to want at least 2 to 3, because in a lot of Commander games, 2 board wipes will happen a game.
Yeah.
Roughly. And I think if you're a good deck builder, it's kind of your responsibility to be able to deal with them, if that makes sense. Because, like, if you're in a pod and everyone else is building decks that aren't following this template, they're not going to be able to wipe the board when someone makes 900 goblins with Krenko. Yeah,
I've totally, like, had discussions with people where, like, after a game, we're big fans of Rule Infinity. We talked about it before, the post-game conversation. And I've had conversations with people where I was sort of like, you know, we sort of died to like 1 million tokens or 1 million huge creatures or something. And I was sort of like, oh, you know, on that last turn, I saw you draw a bunch of cards. Like, was there a board wipe that you were looking for? And they were kind of like, you know, looking at their decks and going, oh, actually, no. Like, now that I think about it, there's like lots of targeted removal, but when the board got that big, my targeted removal just wouldn't cut it. And that's the thing that board wipes are going to do, is there are going to be times in a game, I guarantee it, in every level of power in EDH, there are wraths that are played because you need them sometimes to deal with the board.
Funnily enough, as you go up in power, I think personally, it gets less common. I think usually the higher power, and I'm like not even CDH level, single targeted is more needed.
I think so.
But even at a CDH level, even at that power, 1 board wipe is pretty good to have in your deck. Yeah,
there's some really efficient board wipes, and we're going to cover a lot of our favorites in a sec, but there's ones that are good enough that they're played in CDH. Well, let's do the same thing we did when we were looking at target removal in terms of colors.
Sure.
It's a little bit easier with board wipes because they're pretty self-explanatory. Yeah. We know what they're doing when they cast it. The best colors are going to be white and black.
Yes.
If one of your colors is white or one of your colors in your commander's color identity is black, you're going to be fine. Like, and if you will find the wraths, they're there, they're great, you'll be set.
A brilliant example of why these 2 colors are the best is the card Wrath of God and Damnation.
Yeah. So
they are the exact same card word for word. They are 2 and color, and they say destroy all creatures, they cannot be regenerated.
Yeah. And like these are sort of going to be, to be honest, the reason we often, like I used the word wraths before. I said, you know, these are wraths. That's a term that's used in Magic because of cards like Wrath of God. That's like the historical card.
In the same vein, Rampant Growth became Ramp.
Yeah, exactly.
Wrath of God told us what wraths were.
Yeah. And so I think the thing that we're gonna realize is that often those old cards become the measuring stick.
Yeah.
And so 4 mana on your board wipe is usually like pretty solid. People still play in Commander today Wrath of God because it's just super efficient. 4 mana to deal with everything on the board. It's going to be what we want to do. Damnation
was a chase card in Time Spiral, if you remember. That was like everyone was chasing it.
I think I'm always shocked. Damnation and Wrath of God, which are more or less Wrath of God and what's the other one that's also white?
Oh, it's
the one that's like exactly the same. Anyway, there's two white spells that are identical more or less. Let's do 2 white destroy all creatures. Those are like around like the $5 or $6 mark. Damnation is like $10 or $11.
It's because white is just a little bit better at it, and black is a little bit worse. But look, if you're in both colors, you're living the dream, because then you get to run cards like Merciless Eviction. That's 6 mana, but it says choose one, and I love it when cards say choose one. When cards do multiple things, we've said it before, it's good.
Yeah.
But it says choose one, exile all creatures, exile all planeswalkers, exile all enchantments, or exile all artifacts.
Yeah.
Mwah, love that.
Beautiful. A little bit displaced these days by Farewell.
Farewell is fantastic.
Yeah,
it's mono white and does the same thing but destroy.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
For 6. Red is going to be like reasonably good at wrathing the board. We have like some really good damage based board wipes. Like Blasphemous Act is one of the best wraths in the format, I think we agree. It's also really good. We mentioned Vandal Blast.
Yep.
It's going to be really good at dealing with all artifacts. Blue and green, on the other hand, are looking a lot less strong. It's not to say there's not ones there.
Yeah.
But green in particular has pretty much none. It's got like some spells that will deal with all artifacts or all enchantments. They actually recently printed that. There's one that's coming out in Brothers War. Probably come out by the time we talk about this. But it's a 4-mana sorcery that destroys all artifacts and enchantments. And I think each player who controls one makes a bear. You probably got to put it in your bear tribal deck.
I have not seen this spoiler yet. I'm being chasing that. You'll see me at the pre-releases, everybody, for that card. If you've got it, I'm trading you for it.
It's super cute. But yeah, blue will deal with it as well, but it'll be more like bounce. Similar to when we talk about removal. Yeah. But again, we do have some very, very strong wraths in that color, but they're not going to be quite so good.
Cyclonic Rift, we have to mention here. It's a commander staple. It's basically bounce target creature an opponent controls their hand, but it has an overload cost of 7, which is all non-land permanents to their owner's hand.
Yeah, it's 6 and a blue, it's an instant, it's so strong. Yeah. But yeah, if we don't have access to these really premium wraths in blue and green, we're probably going to have to go for colorless wraths.
There's some pretty decent colorless wraths out there.
There's some okay ones. Never on Nerol's Disc, used to see a lot more play, not so much these days. I think do we both prefer Oblivion Stone to Nev Disc?
I think I prefer Oblivion Stone because it does the untap shenanigans that I like to play with.
You can actually like plan ahead a little bit of Oblivion Stone. So Oblivion Stone's a 3-mana artifact. You can pay 4 and tap it to put an Oblivion counter, I believe, or something like that, or a
safety counter or something like that.
You can put a counter on a permanent. On non-land permanent, and then you can pay 5 and tap Oblivion Ring and destroy all creatures that don't have whatever that counter is called on them.
Yeah.
So either it's 8 mana, destroy all non-land permanents, because you pay 3 for the artifact, 5 to activate it, destroy everything, or over multiple turns you can go 3 mana, cast Oblivion Ring, and then on someone's end step you go, okay, 4 mana, I'm going to save that one. And then next turn, 4 mana, I'm going to save that one. And then when you pay your 5 and destroy it, you get to keep 2 of your things, which can be really cool.
It's pretty good. I like it. All right, let's list out some of our faves in this board wipe category.
Sure, I think we should just start with wraths that are just great. They're not necessarily synergizing usually with our deck, but they're just so good that we have to mention them.
And if you're in the colors, consider running them as your wrath, just because
if money's not an issue, because some of these are quite expensive. So
Toxic Deluge is one that it can fetch a bit of a price. It has dropped because it got reprinted
in Commander Collection Black.
And it's a little bit expensive. I think it's like
the $20 to $30
something
mark.
like that.
It's really strong. It's a 3-mana sorcery that you pay X life, and then all creatures get -X until end of turn. 3 mana. So again, we're talking about Wrath of God and Damnation being
a
like
great
the rate. Yeah, Toxic Deluge is 1 less than those. Cyclonic Rift is sort of sitting at the opposite end of the curve, where, like we said, we're paying 7, but we're getting to deal with everything.
Yeah.
Not just creatures, which is really, really good. Blasphemous Act we mentioned. This one's really good because, again, on the right board, it's reduced by so much by all the creatures.
It's usually 1 red.
It's often 1 red, which is so good because then you get to rebuild after your board wipe.
Because it's 7 and a red.
8 and a red.
8 and a red originally. So it's a 9-mana spell. So again, in the right deck, if you care about high-costed cards, this is a card that synergizes with your deck. It's interesting. It's reduced. I'm going to shout out another black negative effect. It's Massacre Girl.
God, is so good.
I actually really think it's underrated by a mile because we talked about Toxic Deluge, right? It's -X. Something we didn't mention about that is it gets around indestructible.
Yeah.
Which is actually more common on a board than you think. We mentioned problematic creatures to remove. Avacyn makes everything indestructible.
Yeah.
So if you -8 Avacyn, she gone.
Yeah. It's an interesting interaction with Indestructible, where indestructible creatures can't be destroyed, but because creatures that have less than 0 toughness or 0 toughness go to the graveyard as a state-based action. It's all magic lingo, but basically, giving things -X gets around indestructible in that way.
So this is why I love Massacre Girl, and she works in such a wacky way. And look, I would love, because she is a legendary creature, you can make this a commander deck. Ooh. If you have a Massacre Girl list, I'd love to see it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's a really wild effect. So when Massacre Girl enters the battlefield, all creatures get -1 until the end of turn. Now, that seems like, it's not going to kill a lot of things. It'll kill a couple of plants and some soldiers. Fantastic. Yes. But whenever a creature dies, it happens again. That -1 goes on the stack again.
Except for Massacre Girl.
Except for Massacre. She's the last thing standing, basically.
So on the right board, the way that those triggers sort of stack on top of each other is like if someone has 8 tokens and they're all 1/1s. When you cast Massacre Girl, the first -1/-1 trigger goes on the stack. That kills all 8 of those creatures. That does not put 1 more trigger on the stack. That puts 8 more triggers on the stack. So just from those 8 tokens, you are giving all other creatures -9/-9. That's going to kill like 98% of the board.
Unless someone's got an Ulamog out, that's pretty rough.
As long as like basically as soon as someone has a 1/1 and someone has a 2/2, it becomes almost impossible for everyone to avoid the wrath because it just keeps stacking up and getting out of hand.
And I've seen it played multiple times, and I think probably like 9 out of 10 times, Massacre Girl is the last creature on
It
the
kills
battlefield.
everything. It kills everything. It gets a lot better when you can copy it as well, which can be really cool.
That's a fun way to go about it. But look, some other cards that are just generally amazing for board wipes. EDHREC's Wake is just a board wipe that says destroy all your opponent's creatures and planeswalkers.
So for a little higher extra cost, I think it's 9 money.
It's pretty
altogether.
Pretty busted,
But you get to deal with only your opponent's creatures, which is really good. Ruinous Ultimatum is a similar thing. It's all non-land permanents your opponent's control.
That's very hard to cast, though. It is red, white, black.
That sounds right to me.
I think that's right.
So basically only Mardu decks are going to be able to cast it consistently. We also have ones that are like, we find a little bit more narrow in use, but I think are like really criminally underrated. Tragic Arrogance, I swear by.
I've now seen the light on this board wipe. Any white deck, I now probably run Tragic Arrogance.
Super strong. It's 3 white for a sorcery. It says, for each opponent, you choose up to 1 artifact, enchantment, planeswalker, creature.
An artifact?
Yeah. Every non-land permanent type, you choose. The person who casts Tragic Arrogance, they sacrifice every other permanent. So what happens when you resolve this spell? Everyone thinks they're going to keep their best thing. No. When you cast Tragic Arrogance, you choose all of your best permanents, your best artifact, your best enchantment, your best creature. You choose all your opponent's worst things, and they keep those. It is crazy good. It's a 5-mana sorcery. It's such a good rate, and it deals with so many wild boards.
And it puts you in the lead, which is another thing that this card is really good at. And also, I'll give another really cool, interesting way to use this card. If a permanent has multiple super types, like if something is an artifact and a creature, you can actually choose it for both of those permanent types. So if, for example, I cast Tragic Arrogance and Walt has a construct, it's both an artifact and a creature. So when I go to choose all his non-land permanent types, the one-ofs that he gets to keep, I'm going to choose the artifact to be the construct, and I'm going to choose the creature to be the construct. So now I've blown up everything else, and he's left with even less. It's really good.
Yeah, there's a couple other ones that I think we don't need to go into, but are just generically good. Meathook Massacre.
It's banned in standard now, so that gives you a good indication of why it's good.
That's how good it is. Another good example of one that has a very, very high upside for a slightly higher mana value, Necromantic Selection. 7 mana Wrath that destroys all creatures, but you get to choose a creature that was destroyed this way. You get it. Super weird interaction with the way that commanders get to go to the command zone. Because it's all resolved as part of the same effect, people don't get the ability to put their commander in the command zone until after it's resolved. So you can take someone's commander if it's destroyed as part of the board wipe. Super cool, super relevant.
Yeah, you can take this to the bank because we checked it with judges. Yes. But it is part of the resolution of the spell, and even though the decision to move your commander once it's destroyed or exiled or moved to a different zone, like into your library or anywhere else but phasing, because phasing isn't a zone.
Yeah.
It's a state-based action. Even though it's a state-based action, it happens after the resolution of the spell that is Necromantic Selection.
It's all resolving as part of one effect. Yeah, super weird interaction. Then we have, I think, so those are all just generically good, right? Mm-hmm. If you have them, they're probably going to be good in your decks, but there's also going to be a whole bunch of board wipes that are either really synergistic, which we talked about a bunch of times, or just fun. Doomwake Giant in my Araumi deck.
Oh, that's huge.
For instance, so when this creature ETBs, I think, or another enchantment enters the battlefield, creatures your opponents control get -1/-1 until end of turn. So when you encore 3 Doomwake Giants, they all see each other enter the battlefield. So it's -9/-9 for your opponent's creatures.
It's so good.
So good. For 5 mana, you deal with absolutely everything and only your opponent's things. Do you have any other funny ones you can think of?
Yeah, I really like the creature-based ones. Like Crux of Fate is a really good one.
Yeah, so that's in a dragon deck. That's going to be absolutely insane.
Destroy all non-dragon creatures. That's an incredible one. One that I think is one of these cards that does two things and sits in multiple camps. Which is basically Burst Ramp, if you've not listened to last episode. Culling Ritual.
Oh, this is like a CDH staple now.
It actually is so good in CDH, and even just as good in casual formats.
It's just great. It's a 4-mana Wrath that destroys all non-land permanents with mana value 2 or less.
Which includes 0, by the way.
Yes.
Tokens have a 0 mana value,
Yeah,
so
true.
if someone's got a board full of tokens, it hits those too. But once they're all destroyed, you add black equal to the number of permanents destroyed.
Black or green.
Black or green?
Yeah, because it's 2 black-green, I think, the sorcery.
Yeah, that's wild.
To cast. So yeah, if you're in a Golgari deck, you're just like, cool, I destroy all these tokens and I get 10 mana out of it. Becomes a ritual. Yeah.
It's insane. Another really great one for the creature-based decks is Necrotic Hex.
Oh, this is the one each player sacrifices 6 creatures?
And then you create 6 2/2 black tap zombies. So if you're in Zombie Tribal,
yeah.
Bingo bango.
I've seen you win some games with your Scarab God deck with that card. Yeah, for sure. I really like cards like, there's a bunch of white wraths that care about specific things. Winds of Wrath, for instance. Are you familiar with this one?
It's a white card, so you're going to have to explain it.
It's 3 white. It's a sorcery. It's the same mana cost as what was I talking about? Dredging Arrogance.
Yeah.
Destroy all creatures that aren't enchanted.
Oh, wild.
Yeah, so if you're playing an enchantment deck, especially if you're playing one of those Voltron decks where you suit them all up. Yeah. You just like pay 5 mana and it's like, cool, I keep my like amazing suited up creature over here and all your creatures die. Super good.
That's really cool. Yeah, so obviously, look, we could go on forever. Like, white has Fumigate, which is fantastic. If you're in a life gain strategy, it blows up all creatures and you gain a life for each creature.
Yeah, Living Death is like amazing in creature decks. Basically, super weird to read, but basically just swaps all the creatures on the battlefield with all the creatures in the graveyard. So if you're playing a mill deck, you just go like, yep, cool, my 10 creatures die, I get these 40 back.
Yeah, it's really strong. So there's a lot of cards that, again, that word, again, synergy. If you can find a board wipe that synergizes with your deck, you should run it. But
100%.
I want to talk about some modal options because, like, sometimes you want a board wipe, but when you draw it, you're like, oh, this board wipe hits my stuff too, or like, I don't want the board wipe right now, I just want to do this specific thing.
For sure.
And again, like we've talked about cards that fill multiple roles, modality is just perfect when you talk about filling multiple roles.
Yeah.
And board wipes, there are some really great board wipes that do this really well. We've already mentioned Farewell and Merciless Eviction. I want to give a huge shout out to the card Damn.
Oh.
Because I just think so good. It fits. You can put it as one whole card in both your targeted removal and your board wipe slot because for black and a black, you can destroy target creature or you destroy target creature and opponent controls, or you can pay the overload cost, which is 2 white, and destroy all creatures your opponents control.
Yes. So, and that's going to fill that, again, the rate that we're looking for, which is roughly 4 mana to deal with everything. Yeah. That card's super good. And again, it's filling your target removal and your board wipe slot. I'm a big fan of Dismantling Wave.
Yeah, great card.
Yeah. So for 2 and a white, you destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment each of your opponent's controls. Mm-hmm. So target removal, fantastic. It's a 3 mana, 3 for 1. For 1 card, you're dealing with 3 things. But also, you can cycle it for 6 white. So you pay 6 white, discard it, draw a card, and you destroy all artifacts and enchantments. So this card in the early game is like a great target removal spell. Late game, you can blow up all the artifacts and enchantments. It's great.
It's just really handy. Cleansing Nova, Austere Command, other cards that just do one of these things and just choose the right mode at the right time. They're really good options.
They are. They really, really are. Well, let's just go quickly call back to that number that we talked about earlier, because we said we can go as low as 1 and as high as 5, right? Do you want to talk about like which decks you tend to go like lower on that number for? I have one that immediately pops to mind for me. which is Averna, my Cascade list.
Yeah.
It's just like, there's so many creatures that are so crucial to my game plan in that deck that I think the only ones I really play, I think I play Blasphemous Act because it just deals with everything. And I think I play Volcanic Torrent, which I didn't mention before, but it's like, it's a board wipe that only hits your opponent's creatures, but it has Cascade, and it deals damage.
So it synergizes with your
deck.
It
synergizes with the deck, and it's also one-sided, because I really want to keep all my creatures. So, yeah, that deck I think runs 2 or 1 in that one. Like, what other decks do you have that are sort of sit in that kind of spot?
In a very similar vein, I have an Abomination of Llanowar deck that floods the boards with elves and makes a huge elf ball that you kill people with, and obviously I don't want to run cards like Damn or Damnation in that deck, because I want all my token elves because they're buffing my commander.
Totally.
So yeah, and obviously again, I mentioned it in the last episode with Ramp, but the exception to this, and we already mentioned it, CDH doesn't want to run a lot of board wipes because generally it wants to win quicker than it wants to win before a board wipe is needed.
Yeah.
However, I do run in my CDH deck, I run Anger of the Gods.
That's fair.
Which is a pretty good red board burn spell. It just deals 3 damage to each creature. And in CDH, that kills most of the problematic stuff.
Yeah, we mentioned the Culling Ritual is really good in CDH.
Yep.
I think mostly they're just like the really efficient ones are played a lot. So Toxic Deluge is super commonly played. Cyclonic Rift is also really commonly played in CDH.
Because that basically wins on the end step if you do it right.
I think that one's played a lot in like the Thrasios kind of builds because you're getting so many lands
Lots
out
of
that
mana.
you can just leave mana up. Because that's the other thing Thrasios decks do, is they just leave all their mana open, and then if nobody does anything, you just get to scry one, draw a card, scry one, draw a card.
Such a good card. But look, there are decks where I do run a lot of board wipes because they run with the commander's strategy.
Yeah.
The one that comes to mind for me is my Liesa deck.
Yeah, the Death and Taxes kind of thing.
For sure. And the reason why I want to do a lot of board wipes, I do have a lot of creatures in the deck, but honestly, I don't care if they die because I want to force my opponents to go for a really long game, and I can cast my commander all the time because Liesa has this alternative command attacks where you pay 2 life instead of 2 mana.
Yeah.
So you can always get her out pretty easily. So if I make my opponents cast more spells, my commander triggers more often, and every spell they cast, if Liesa's on field, they lose 2 life. So if I'm board wiping and forcing them to rebuild a board state,
works really well for you.
Works really well for me. I'll just sit back with my 5/5 lifelink flyer.
Yeah. I feel like that's also an interesting one where you have a lot of really crucial artifacts and enchantments in that deck.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of board wipes that deal with creatures specifically, because then...
Yeah.
And this actually resonates with the deck that I run lots of board wipes in, which is my Sisay Shrines deck.
Oh, it's all enchantments.
Yeah, it's like 95% enchantments. And so, like, all of these spells that say destroy all creatures, I just get to go like, yeah, cool. Like, yes, Sisay dies. I can't do my tutor thing anymore. I have like 5 shrines over here. So while you're all reboarding, I'm drawing like 10 cards a turn and draining you all for 10 and like all this other stuff.
So look, this is when we call back to that number. We said, how many board wipes did we say? We said at least 1.
At least 1.
But 2 to 3.
2 to 3 is good.
4 is probably as many as you want to run.
Yeah, absolute maximum, I would say 5. Probably. Yeah.
So, but when you're trying to decide between that number of 1 to 5, have a think of what your deck wants to do, and is a board wipe good for it?
Yeah.
Or is a board wipe bad for it?
Yeah, and what kind of things are you okay with blowing up as well? So like, yeah, there's going to be decks where your favorite board wipe is probably going to be Vandal Blast, because you don't want to touch the creatures at all, but you're super happy to blow up all the artifacts.
For sure. All right, another form of removal.
Yes.
That we've spoken about a little bit already is counterspells.
Yes. Counterspells, I think some people might not immediately think of them as target removal because they don't say like destroy target or exile target or any of the things that we typically associate with target removal. But as we mentioned kind of earlier, they do deal with our most problematic problem cards that we encounter in the format on the stack. And there are going to be spells, like there were enchantments and like there were artifacts, there are also spells that we have to deal with on the stack. And in unlike with the artifacts and enchantments, we can't deal with these once they hit the board. Like if it's an instant or a sorcery, we have to deal with it right now.
If it resolves, it's probably going to end the game. So a couple of these, like a couple of my favorites are the big X spells, like Torment of Hailfire.
Yeah, that card just says I win the game, more or less, if it's got enough mana pumped into it.
It's a bit of a weird card, but it's black, and X, and if X, basically you repeat the following X times, which is you either sacrifice a creature or non-land permanent.
Yep.
Sacrifice a non-land permanent.
Sacrifice a permanent, I think, because you can sack lands.
Can you really?
I think so.
Wow, that's rough. Anyway, you either sacrifice a non-land or permanent, you discard a card,
or you lose
3 life. But you just force your opponents to have to lose the life.
Yeah.
Or they sacrifice everything and you win the game in a couple of turns anyway.
Yeah, exactly right.
Exsanguinate is another good example of that. It's just...
Same sort of effect. Yeah, gonna drain everybody. There's also just like big spells like Expropriate that don't say I win the game on it, but they kind of say I win the game on them.
I'll reference the salt score thing on EDHREC. That one has a biggie.
Absolutely, they do. You're also gonna get like X burn spells in this kind of slot. So cards like Comet Storm and Crackle with Power, often in like a big spells deck, like my Kaza Wizards deck. If I'm casting these spells with enough mana, they usually just win the game. So you're probably going to need a counterspell to deal with them.
Some creatures that you have to deal with on the stack also exist as well. Like the big boy, Craterhoof Behemoth. He's not a creature that is problematic for the rest of the game. He's a problem right now when he's on the stack, because if he hits the battlefield, he gives everything plus a billion.
Yeah.
And it gains trample and you're dead.
And the way that the magic works on the stack is unless you have the ability to remove that trigger on the stack. Like, you can cast your Swords to Plowshares on Craterhoof Behemoth after he hits the battlefield, but the enter the battlefield trigger is still going to happen.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like you say, you've got to deal with Craterhoof on the stack, and that's what counterspells are going to be so good for.
Yeah.
What kind of counterspells do we like, do you reckon? What's the kind of criteria that you're looking at? I think you're the counterspell master, so I'll defer to you a little bit here.
As someone that does love running a lot of counterspells, generally, just like our, advice on ramp and even our advice on board wipes, there's typically a good measuring stick of like mana efficiency to what the card does.
For sure.
In counterspells, 2 mana is usually the measuring stick.
Yeah.
So the traditional card Counterspell, which has 1 million printings. One of my favorite editions is I think it's 6th edition. It's this goofy wizard that's like...
I've got that one.
Yeah,
that's
I love
funny.
that. It's so fun. It's
funny.
so good. But yeah, 2 mana is usually the
sweet spot.
The sweet spot. If you have the money, go for less.
Yes.
Because there are cards that say you can counter things for free. Force of Will, Force of Negation, Pact of Negation. These are all cards that can essentially counterspell for free.
They're all absolute CEDH staples. If that's something you're interested in playing, you'll definitely need a copy of those, or you can proxy some.
Exactly. I'd recommend proxying them. Fierce Guardianship also sits in that category.
Also really, really good. We should note there that outside of CEDH, they're probably going to run into some people who feel pretty salty about free counterspells. It's something that they can't plan for. They can't see it coming. Because the cards are so expensive, people are kind of going to look at it and be like, oh, I feel like a little bit like you're out of my league here. So be careful with those.
Yep.
But again, they are really, really strong. I think, with the ones that go under 2 mana, sometimes those ones are going to be very modal, they're very specific counterspells.
Yeah,
which are great for CEDH, but less good for casual sort of things. So Swan Song counters an instant, a sorcery, or an enchantment spell, right?
Yeah. It also gives the opponent that's getting countered a 2/2 flying bird.
Which as we've discussed with other cards, we don't really care about.
Not a big bit answer.
But, in casual games, yes, there will be instant sorceries and enchantments, but, that's not countering a Craterhoof Behemoth.
Mm-mm.
And we kind of need our counterspells to do that in casual games. So, actually, 2 mana really is that sweet spot, isn't it? Because that's where we're going to get cards like Counterspell. Like Arcane Denial, I like a lot. Lets you draw a card when you finish it. Mana Drain is just better Counterspell. It gives you some mana when you're done. What else can you think of that's around that spot?
I do love, there's a couple of 3 mana counterspells that generally are going to be 2 mana in the right decks.
Sure.
Wash Away is one that I really like. It's got a cleave cost for 3, which counters anything, but it has a 1 mana... It's 1 mana usually, and it counters target spell that wasn't cast from the opponent's hand.
Yeah, the really crucial one that starts here is that all commanders, if they're cast from the command zone, are not cast from your hand. So that is 1 mana counter target commander spell, basically. Yeah,
I also love Saw It Coming is a great counter spell in the right deck.
that's the one with Foretell, but it effectively becomes a 2 mana counter spell.
Oh, one that you're going to love, Wizard's Retort.
Yes, big fan of Wizard's Retort. It is a 3 mana counterspell. It costs 1 less if you have a wizard.
Which in the right deck,
it's
gonna be 2 mana.
I am so goofy that I actually don't run counterspell in my wizard's deck. I only run Wizard's Retort, which is so bad because on an empty board,
Have you ever been forced to cast it for 3?
I don't think so.
Well, there you go. That's your answer then. You've run an objectively better card, if not for Vorthos reasons.
Yeah.
In your deck, because it's
true.
That's brilliant.
I think around that 3 and like more mana slot, you're going to be looking more for instance like counter spells that interact with your deck really well.
Yeah.
Another one I rate super highly in my Kaza deck. I think I told you about this before. Familiar's Ruse. Do you remember what this one does?
No.
It's blue counter target spell.
It's pretty good.
Great
yeah,
already.
It's a good start.
It's counter spell. As an additional cost to cast this spell, return a creature you control to its owner's hand.
Ooh.
So like. In the wrong deck, it's going to feel really bad,
downside,
right?
Yeah.
You're returning a creature that you kind of want to stay.
If you're in, for example, a sea creature, Kraken tribal, where everything costs 1 million, don't run that. No. That's bad.
But if you're in a deck that really likes creatures that enter the battlefield and have enter the battlefield effects, like my Wizard deck, which has a lot of ETBs in it, that's like 2 mana counter a spell. Also, I get this card again.
Yeah, I can do the Archaeomancer loops. You can get those back, all that kind of stuff. There's also some decks that really synergize strongly with tokens, like Brutaclad.
Yeah.
If you're running token strategies, or maybe have a treasure strategy, Spell Swindle. I know it's a costy counterspell, but
the upside is so high.
It's so good. Spell Swindle is 3 blue, so it's 5 mana, which is considerably more than what I said, where 2 mana is the sweet spot.
Yep.
However, when you counter the spell, you create treasure tokens equal to the spell's mana cost that you counted.
We talked about treasures in our ramp deck. It's in our ramp. So last episode we talked about ramp. They're really good. You can store them. You can have crazy explosive turns with them. Yeah, super strong card.
It's really, really good.
There's like weird ones that are only good in certain decks, like Forceful Denial. Is a 5 mana counter spell like Spell Swindle, but it has Cascade. So if you're running a Cascade deck, that's super fun.
One of my favorite ones, it's a creature counter spell. Draining Whelk. Have you heard of this?
Oh, it's like 6 mana, right?
It's so silly in terms of what it is, but if you're in the right deck, in a +1 counters builds, you have to be.
Well, it's also really good in certain decks, so we should explain what it does. It's a 6 mana creature that has flash, and when it enters the battlefield, you counter a spell. So like, on its own, not so great, but you put X +1 counters on it, where X is the mana value of the spell you countered. So like, it's okay. It's good in a +1 counters deck. You know what it's absolutely incredible in? Oh my god, I blanked on his name. Who's the Teamer commander that reduces the cost of creature spells?
Anima. You're a genius.
I can take no credit for this. I saw it in Jordan's Anima deck that he built. It's so in Anima, because you reduce the cost of your creature spells, your Draining Whelk can flash in for blue. So
then it is counterspell, but with a massive upside.
Put like a billion +1 counters on your weird squid.
That's awesome. Look, we could go on about counterspells for ages. Yes. I think there's again a bit of a shout out to be made for counterspells that are modal.
Yes.
There are plenty of these. Like Archmage's Charm is blue, and a blue, and it has like 3 modes. One of them is counterspell. One of them is like draw 2, discard 2.
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
Does heaps of things.
Cryptic Command is another one of those where it's like 1 blue or something like that.
Sounds right.
And it's like you can choose 1 any number of times.
Yes.
Or like you can choose
3 and you can choose the same one multiple times. That's like draw a card, counter target spell, and like it does something else.
It does a bunch. There's also Mystic Confluence as well, which does a bunch. You found the Villain's Lair from the D&D set's pretty good.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool one. I really like. I think we're both a big fan of Sublime Epiphany.
Oh, that's phenomenal.
That's like counter target spell, do 5 other things. I think there are 6 modes on that card.
One of them is create a token copy of a creature.
Yes, the other one is there's one that's draw a card.
Yeah,
and there's one you can choose all of them if you
get it right, you can do it.
The one that you rarely do, it can happen.
Yeah.
The one that you rarely get is counter target activated ability. But the thing is, you could use that as your counter spell. Like rather than countering a spell, you could respond to an activated ability with Sublime Epiphany, counter the activated ability, make a token copy, bounce an on-land permanent, draw a card. That is insane for 6 mana.
Yeah, that's pretty huge.
Super, super strong. I actually want to segue a little bit from counter spells here. Because counter spells also do another thing that we talked about that we talked about other people not really mentioning before, which is protection.
Yeah, this is something that a lot of people leave out.
Yes.
And counterspells is a great way to protect yourself and your stuff.
Well, counterspells are really cool because, again, when we put our decks in Moxfield and we're putting our tags on them, counterspells are one of very few spells that I include that are a target removal spell, because they can remove a problem permanent when they need to.
Mm-hmm.
And I consider them a protection spell, because when someone tries to Wrath and I have a huge board, or someone tries to remove my commander and I really need my commander, that counterspell becomes not so much like reactive as proactive, where you're like, no, I'm going to protect my ability to win the game. And so
for sure.
Counterspells are a great example of this. We recommend at least 5 of these protection spells. I think we said 5 to 10 in total.
Yeah, it depends on like your deck as well. Again, we say that all the time, but if your deck is like a combo deck, for example, that's very intricate, it has like 5 pieces that all need to be on the board to win, and it wins in no other way, you're going to want to run more of this protection kind of stuff.
It's going to be crucial to your ability to win the game. So we sort of like broke this category down a little bit into like spells that protect your like permanence or your board. So counterspells are a great example of that. We also have a bunch of really, really good like white instant speed, like 1 mana spells now that protect just a permanent, like Blacksmith Skill.
That's one of your favorites.
There's the green one, Tamio Safekeeping, which is basically the same thing. They basically just say, they're effectively a counterspell. They say like target permanent gains hexproof and indestructible. You're not dealing with that thing.
Yeah, so basically in the instance for new players that don't get how that interaction works, is if someone targets your commander with a destroy target creature spell, and they've listened to our removal section and they're running the right removal, if you, in response to their target to destroy your commander, give your commander hexproof, the hexproof resolves before the destruction spell, and then the destruction spell can't resolve
because it can't target that creature anymore.
It's illegal to target
because it has hexproof.
Yeah, so it's basically like a counter spell.
Yeah, there's also like sort of interesting interactions that are similar to those sort of spells. They don't specifically say like hexproof indestructible. We like those cards a lot, by the way. But there are other cards that kind of do the same thing, like Ephemerate. Right?
Oh, yeah. That's really weird, tricky way this works as well, because Ephemerate basically flickers a creature at instant speed.
Yeah,
so it exiles it and then brings it back to the battlefield. However, when it comes back to the battlefield, yes, now the creature that you're trying to protect is not got hexproof and it's not got indestructible. But Magic is the way the game works. It sees it as a new entity because it left and came back. So now the target that the destruction spell was on has gone.
It doesn't exist
anymore. So it just fizzles.
Even if it's Muldrifter, and it's the same Muldrifter that you had just had on the battlefield, Magic kind of remembers where creatures came from and like what they're doing. If that makes sense.
True.
And so that destroy spell was saying this specific Muldrifter, and when you flicker it and remove it from the battlefield, bring it back, it's not that Muldrifter anymore, which is very strange to get your head around, but is a great way to dodge removal.
There's some wild ways to protect from targeted removal that I personally love. I love a misdirection or a bolt bend or a deflecting swat. So all these cards that I just mentioned basically do the exact same thing. They redirect the target. So the spell will resolve, and the person that's casting it, their spell will hit something, but it ain't going to be your thing.
Nope. Your thing is now safe. And it also, like, these almost become... I mean, you never count them as a target removal slot, right? But they often become target removal. Like, if someone tries to remove your thing and you can bolt bend it somewhere else... now it's removing one of your opponent's things, which is great.
I love using those. It also feels so... You feel like a proper control wizard when you do that. You feel like you've channeled the lightning and thrown it elsewhere. Totally. It's really satisfying.
You absolutely do. There's also, like, to move sort of away from the, like, instant speed spells that are doing that kind of thing, we do also have permanents that are very commonly played in Commander that will also protect our board, our creatures, often our commander.
Give a shout out to the 2 sets of shoes that everyone runs.
Swiftfoot Boots, Lightning Greaves, they're super commonly played for a reason. They give your commander, one of them gives them Shroud, one of them gives them Hexproof. In most instances, they're the same. It just says your opponents can't remove them.
But in certain, we've got to think about your deck. If you're running a Voltron deck, don't run don't run Lightning Greaves. No. Because that gives the thing that you're equipping it with Shroud, which means you can't target it. Yeah. So if you're in a Voltron deck, which is a strategy where you're trying to build up one creature with a bunch of equipment or auras, Lightning Greaves are not the card for you.
Lean more towards your Swiftfoot Boots. Even though it's going to cost that 1 to equip, it's worth it for sure. We also have like creatures that kind of do this. Sareth the Viper's Fang. Are you familiar with this card?
It sounds like a Golgari card. Am I right?
It's got Golgari vibes.
It's giving Golgari.
It's a green creature. I think it's legendary. Yeah, it is. It totally is. Cool. 2 green. It's 2/3 Death Touch, I want to say. It says tapped creatures you control have Death Touch, untapped creatures you control have Hexproof, and it says pay 1 and tap Sarith, untap target creature.
Whoa!
Very, very weird. When it's just sitting on the board, it means that your creatures that aren't attacking, aren't tapped, aren't doing other things, just have hexproof, which is great.
Yeah.
But also, yeah, that 1 mana untap a creature thing.
It's instant speed protection.
Yeah, it kind of almost works as a little pseudo counterspell in green.
Well, I mean, the other thing that I think this deck you're not giving a big enough shout out to is the other ability that attacking creatures, basically tap creatures have Death Touch, so attacking creatures have Death Touch.
Yeah.
So if you're in a go wide strategy, this should be your protection spell.
Yeah.
Because it just makes all your creatures go through, because no one's going to want to block a 1/1 with Death Touch.
Totally. This is ticking those multiple boxes like we've talked about. This is going to appear under multiple tags on Moxfield. We love that. Yeah, there's also going to be like other ways of protecting. We're still going to call them protection spells. I feel like we both still call them protection spells, but they're more about protecting our win condition, like our sort of strategy. Does anything like pop in your head like the sort of does this for one of your decks? Or?
Yeah, we'll dive more into like win conditions later, but you know, I already mentioned that win conditions are things that a card that is going to win you the game or get you very close.
Yes.
I think a really great example of this is if you're in like a mill strategy, for example.
Yeah. Where you're going to be putting a lot of your library into your graveyard.
Yeah.
Like it's going to be full.
Sometimes you need to protect yourself from that win con.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you might mill yourself out, or you need to refill the tank of your library and keep milling for different reasons. So Elixir of Immortality reshuffles your graveyard into your library.
Yep, and you gain a bit of life. You also shuffle the elixir into your library, so you can use it again later, which is super cool.
Wild, so it's a repeatable piece of protection, I guess.
Yep.
But the Titans, the Eldrazi Titans that shuffle your entire library, that protects you from milling out pretty well.
Totally.
But also, like, Laboratory Maniac is a win con in and of itself.
Yeah, because it says when you draw a card from an empty library, normally you would lose the game, obviously, when you do that. That's one of the rules of Magic. Instead, you win the game with Laboratory Maniac.
But even in some other decks, like, for example, tribal decks, if your whole point is to get a bunch of creatures like vampires, let's say, if your plan is to flood the board with vampires, that buff other vampires, that give vampires flying, that give vampires death touch, and just kill your opponents with a bunch of vampires, you're going to want to run ways to protect that win con. Because if someone board wipes before the win con quite happens, because you're in a creature-based deck, it could be, like, really brutal.
Could be hard to come back from that.
Yeah, so running a card like Patriarch's Bidding is
so good.
Great way to recover. 3 black and a black for a sorcery. Each opponent, or each player, chooses a creature type, then they return all the creatures of that type from their graveyard to the battlefield.
Yep. So, assuming that your opponents are not also playing tribal decks, you know, they might name, like, a goblin, and they might get 2 things back from their graveyard, or they might name, like, you know, Artificer and get 2 cards back from their graveyard. But if you're a vampire deck, you're like, okay, vampires. I'm going to
20 things.
Yeah, these 20 vampires in my bin, for sure.
We've seen it happen.
Yep, we have. The other thing that's going to sort of protect your win con when you're playing, I think, again, those, like, little creature-based things. Graveyard recursion. We sort of even talked about this before, but yeah, when you have really crucial creatures in particular, the ability to bring those creatures back from the battlefield, from the graveyard to the battlefield, or even from the graveyard to your hand, is going to be super, super helpful. Cards like Sun Titan are... Command staples for a reason.
Yep.
They just bring back so many relevant things. So sometimes ETBs or attacks, it reanimates a permanent with mana value 3 or less.
Yep.
Brings so much of your deck back to the battlefield. It's so good for that reason.
Archaeomancer I mentioned earlier.
Brings back your spells, your instants and sorceries, because those are going to be crucial to your win con. You know, if you're going to want to win with Comet Storm, if Comet Storm's in your bin, you might want to cast it again. You'll need your Archaeomancer. Yep.
One of my favorites for enchantment decks is Hall of Heliod's Generosity. It's a land.
It's a land.
It's so good. It fits in a land slot because it taps for mana as well. It's not like a Maze of Ith land where it's like you can't count it as a land. It's just a land that taps for colorless, but you can pay, I think, 4. Is it?
Might be 3 even.
It's white pip.
It's like 1 and a white and tap it or something like that.
So you can only run it in white commander identities.
White plus.
But honestly, if you're in enchantments, you should be anyway.
Yes.
And you tap it and you return an enchantment from your graveyard to your hand.
Yeah. It's so strong.
Yeah.
The other thing about graveyard recursion, especially in the right deck, and we sort of already alluded to this with Patriarch's Bidding, it can be a win con. Like, your ability to recur
sure.
your board can just win you the game, right? Cards like Command the Dreadhorde, and even to a lesser extent, a card that we see a lot at our store, and it's probably on the uptick, Incarnation Technique. That card is busted.
I think it's phenomenal.
It's so strong.
So it's basically it's 4 and a black.
4 and a
right?
black.
4 and a black. It's instant speed.
Sorcery
speed. Okay. Sorcery speed. You return target creature from your graveyard.
You mill 5.
Oh, mill 5, and then you return target creature from graveyard.
From graveyard to the battlefield, yeah.
Yeah, to the battlefield, which is the big thing there. It returns it instantly to the battlefield. However, it has this weird mechanic on it called Demonstrate.
I think it's from the Strixhaven Commander decks.
It's a wild mechanic, which I actually want to see more of, because I believe it was built for Commander.
Yeah, totally.
It 100% was.
Yeah.
Basically, the Demonstrate says you can have a target opponent
copy this
spell and do it themselves for free. They don't have to pay any mana for it.
Yeah.
So theirs will resolve first, but if you do that, you do it twice.
Yeah. So the typical sort of play style here with Incarnation Technique is you target one of your opponents, you make it sound like a really, really good deal for them. You probably sneakily choose an opponent who doesn't play that many creatures, not that many big creatures.
Yeah.
They mill, they might get a cool creature back. They might, in some instances, maybe they get Natali, but you do it twice. So you mill 10.
Which already gives you a 10th of your library to look at.
Yes.
And it's 5 mana, so you've probably got things in your library already. You should be in that strategy.
Yeah.
So you're looking at probably well over 15% to 20% of your deck, even if you're just casting this on turn 5.
Yeah, it's so strong. Wow. It's also another one of those cards that's going to tick multiple boxes, right? So it's Graveyard Recursion, which, as we said, protects our win con, protects our ability to bring our best creatures back. It's also, if you're in a graveyard deck, it's milling you.
Yeah.
So you're wanting to do that anyway. So now for 5 mana, you're getting 2 things back, and you're milling more ammunition into your bin. It's so strong.
It's phenomenal. Now, look, I think we'd be remiss if we were talking about protection and didn't mention our life total.
Yes, because there's definitely going to be decks that we're going to be playing where maybe because we don't put out that many creatures, or maybe because we're just playing a commander that gets hated on a lot. Shout out your Eurocode deck.
Yeah, so true.
It's going to be more important, I think, in those decks where you're going to be targeted a little bit or swung at a lot to include these ways of protecting yourself that are protecting your life total is the good way of putting it. Yeah.
So, for example, there's a couple of different ways we can protect our life total. Firstly, from attackers. That's a really easy kind of thing to think about in Magic, because it's a step in it's a step in your turn that everyone goes to combat. Attackers are going to happen. So there are cards that stop attackers from coming at you, like Ghostly Prison or Propaganda.
Yep.
Basically the same card, one's white, one's blue, that say creatures can't attack you unless their owner pays 2.
For each creature.
Attacking.
And they're also enchantments, so they sit there and stop all your opponents from doing that. There's similar sort of cards like Sphere of Safety. That one costs a little bit more mana, it's white, but it instead of paying 2, they pay X, where X is the number of enchantments you control.
So in the right deck, that's way better than Ghostly Prison.
Yeah, it becomes do you want to pay 8 for each of these creatures? And it's well, I can't do that.
Yeah. Norn's Annex is another really fun one.
Yeah, you super rate this one. Yeah, because you have to specifically pay Phyrexian white mana.
Yeah, so basically, if someone's not playing white, you force them to pay life.
Yeah.
Or they just don't, and awesome, you don't get attacked.
I think I also have a weird prevents people from attacking you card. I like Norn's Annex. I think that's your that's the one you rate. Elephant Grass. I think I've showed it to you once before. It's an enchantment for a green. Yeah. Okay.
A single green.
A single green pip. It says it has cumulative upkeep, right? So Mystic Remora, you have to pay it's cumulative upkeep of 1 generic mana. So the first turn goes around, you have to pay 1, next turn it's 2, next turn it's 3. It
gets harder to keep around.
Yes. However, for 1 green, it says black creatures can't attack you.
Just straight up,
black creatures can't attack you. Wow. Non-black creatures can't attack you unless they pay, I think it's 2 for each creature attacking you.
So it's Ghostly Prison, but black creatures just straight up can't attack you.
And yeah, like the turn you comes down, it costs 1 mana instead of 3.
That's wild.
Wild card.
That's really fun.
So,
elephant grass.
Elephant grass. It's very, very old. You see it and you're kind of like, okay, this was printed at a time in Magic's history where they didn't know what they were doing.
Please tell me the art has some like cute elephant in a long field of grass or something.
It does actually.
Oh,
it's like
really
a super sweet. It looks very like sort of rustic. It's kind of that time in Magic's history where the artists were sort of like probably friends of the Magic designers and
still
stuff.
using oil paintings as well.
Yeah, it's like rustic. It's nice.
I love that. Another great way to protect your life totals, fogs.
Yep.
Love a good fog.
This is just like typically an instant that just says prevent all combat damage that will be dealt this turn.
It originated from a card called Fog.
Yeah, I think it's just single green pip, right? Instant speed.
Yeah.
For 1 green.
Prevent all combat
damage that dealt this turn.
Yeah.
We've got a bunch more recently that have like well, there's a few that like other versions of the effect, like Spore Frog and like Dawn Charm has like other modes and stuff.
Yep.
But there's also a bunch of these fogs that they've printed now that have like upside for you. There's like the one that's free, that's Obscuring Haze.
Oh, that's really good.
Yeah,
if you control your commander, it's free.
Yeah. And it only fogs your opponent's creatures. So if you have good blocks, you cast Obscuring Haze for free, and like your creatures just kill all their creatures. None of your creatures take damage.
Oh, that's strong.
Really, really strong.
There's some other ones that have really, really good upside.
Yeah.
Ink Shield.
Card is so good.
It's phenomenal. If you're in white and black, and you like just if you're thinking about running a protection spell and following our guidelines of running, like
5 to 10
protection spells, consider Ink Shield.
Yes.
Prevents all combat damage. And for
each 1 damage prevented this way, you make a 2/1 Inkling.
With flying. Each 1 damage. So if someone's swinging you for 20, which, in Commander
feasible.
Happens, if a Golter is holding a sword, that dino is going to hit you hard.
Yep.
You can prevent all that combat damage and create a ton of tokens. They're all flying in 2/1s.
They're flying in their 2/1s. I think the thing that people neglect to mention when they're talking about this card is it's because it's for each 1 damage, you're making a 2/1 Inkling.
So you're doubling the damage on the crackback, basically.
Yeah, immediately. And they're flying! Like, no one is going to be able to block
Wild.
20 Inklings. It's not going to happen. Arachnogenesis is a similar sort of thing.
It was the original Ink Shield.
Yes.
But yeah.
That's actually gotten a little bit expensive because I think it's only been put in a Commander Precon that's like 5 or 6 years ago. But
yeah.
And also Spider Tribal is like a thing now.
I found the Spider Tribal Commander, the Golgari one, that you pay a black activated cost and each opponent loses life equal to the amount of spiders you control.
Whoa, I've never seen that card before.
I found it in my collection and I just was like, where the hell has this been all my life?
So strange.
So I'm going to build Spider Tribal, I reckon. It's going to be fun.
Beautiful.
Bear Tribal to Spider Tribal.
Yeah, for sure. I think the other thing that's going to protect our life total is just gaining life, right?
Oh, for sure,
It's just going to put us out of range of a lot of people. In life gain decks, this is just going to be inbuilt, right?
Yep.
So the life gain is just incidental. It's like, I gain life. It triggers my Aetherflux Reservoir, which is going to win me the game anyway.
Yep.
But it's also just stopping me from dying.
But giving all your creatures lifelink can just protect your life total. A card that's ubiquitous in our store now is Whip of Erebos.
Yeah.
Because it's a black artifact, a legendary
enchantment.
A legendary artifact enchantment.
Super strange.
It basically gives all your creatures lifelink. And it can recur a creature from the graveyard.
For 2 and a black. 2 black, yeah.
It's pretty good, but it's one of these cards that's like this weird sleeper agent that goes unnoticed, but now really doesn't go unnoticed in our store.
It now, yeah.
Because it just gets you so much life over a course of a game that people forget to remove it.
Yeah, for sure. Another one that I've been seeing a lot recently, actually, especially around our store, is I can never remember the name of the card. It's an enchantment. True Conviction. I think it's 3 white from memory, so you have to be probably like 2 color white or maybe monocolor white to run this. But it just says, it's an enchantment that says, creatures you control have double strike and lifelink.
Whoa!
2 of arguably some of the best keywords you can possibly have.
Yeah, that's strong.
In a token deck, it's like shocking how quickly it makes your 2/2s so difficult to block. Double strike is so hard to stop.
Well, let's say you've got 3 2/2s, right?
Yeah.
And now they've got lifelink and double strike. It's
a huge life swing.
Yeah, that's 12 life, right? Double strike, that's huge.
Yeah,
That's
it's 12 life to your opponents if they don't block, and it's 12 life to you because they have life.
The life swing is huge.
Yeah,
so
really good.
Gaining life is a great way to protect yourself, but protecting your life total can also mean you should protect yourself from being targeted. Burn decks do exist.
Yes.
Leyline of Sanctity is a great one.
Just gives you Shroud, I think, or gives you Hexproof.
Hexproof. Tamio the Shield Mage as a Planeswalker that does the same thing.
Yeah, I think we have to, when we're talking about protection, we have to talk about, it's got protection in the name, the quintessential protection card, Teferi's Protection.
Yes. However, I have seen a removal, a card that basically counters, it's not a removal spell, but it counters the effect of Teferi's Protection. So for those that don't know, Teferi's Protection is 3 and a white for an instant speed spell that phases out all of your permanents, everything you control is just gone. It's not exiled, phased out. They don't move zones, so tokens still exist. It's fantastic. And you gain protection from everything, and your life total cannot change. So you are basically locked in this incredible position that no one can touch you.
No.
You cannot lose. It's fantastic.
It does exile on resolution, so you're not going to get the ability to do it again.
Yes.
But it's really, really strong.
It is incredibly strong. Now, there's a new card from the Brothers War Spoilers list that perfectly counters this.
I know, I've seen it.
It's Disciple of Silas. I can't remember what the full
something
title
like that.
is.
Disciple of something.
But it says permanents can't phase in.
Yeah.
And I love the idea of someone being like, haha, the quintessential protection spell. I leave this battlefield for you to fight over who will get the best result, and I will come back in and win the game later. And you're like, okie dokie, Disciple? And they're like, I now lose protection from anything. I now lose protection from everything. And I can be targeted, my life total can change, but
I have no permanence. Oh, God. Horror.
I think horror. That's hilarious.
It is funny. I'm glad they finally printed a Teferi's Protection proof card.
Yeah.
Very, very funny.
Oh, hilarious. Look, we've been talking for a little bit.
We have
now.
indeed.
This has been a long bit, and we've still got a little bit to go through. We still have things like win conditions and enhancers to discuss. We're going to talk about mana bases as well, which is like a whole episode in of itself, in my opinion.
For sure. But before that, we have to do our thrifty interlude.
We're going to have an interlude that doesn't cost you a lot of money, and it's going to make you laugh. That's the goal.
That's the goal. So every time we have an episode, we feature a new thrifty card, and Walt writes weird crap about it, and then performs it in some manner. So James, do you want to read us this episode's card?
I would love to read it, and it's actually very fitting right now, considering we just talked about protection. Solitary Confinement for 2 and a white, and it's an enchantment that reads, at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice Solitary Confinement unless you discard a card. Skip your draw step, you have Shroud, prevent all damage that would be dealt to you.
I'm sorry for the lateness of this transmission, but I have been trapped against my will. I was accosted during my morning stroll in the park, and the brutes have confined me within the harshest prison their ghoulish minds could conceive of. The walls around me are white, but they are adorned with icons of their foul idols, who stare at me, trapped themselves by their own visage. The ground beneath my feet is covered in a blue moss, perhaps their own attempt at replicating the grass of our world. Standing upon this loathsome growth, ivory platforms stretch towards the horizon, covered in painted silver leaves, etchings of their primitive language, and worst of all, remnants of their wretched meals, encrusted across every surface in disgusting smears of brown, yellow, and black. Wait, I have my sense of true north. I believe I can identify the nature of my prison. It's a local game store. Get budgeted!
Have you ever had that feeling that, like, you've been in a game store for too long, and you kind of go outside from what was a sunny day, and it's now pitch black? It's kind of like that casino thing where they don't put clocks or windows in casinos.
Oh my god.
When you think about it, every local game store kind of does that, doesn't it?
I think every local game store is also kind of a casino.
Gambling. You
play chance.
Play chance, buy a pack. There you go.
It's also there's cards there. Oh my god, it's terrifying. It's really terrifying. Well, look, yeah, Solitary Confinement. It's a good card. And if you want to check us out for more video versions of some of those, it's G_Commander Community on TikTok.
There's a hilarious one with a zombie butler, which I very highly encourage you to go and look at. Great card too.
That was my partner's favourite one so far, actually.
It's probably my favourite too. Great voice acting in that one, I think.
Thank you.
All right, now we just spent at least nearly 2 hours looking at the clock on removal alone. That was a huge conversation. So
to be fair, it's very important, but let's move on to the rest of the deck.
Where do you think removal is in next to card draw and ramp? Because we started with those two in the last episode, but removal it felt really key. I think
we've almost kind of worked in order of importance, except that we haven't. Later on, we are going to touch on lands, which I think I would argue probably sits somewhere around these three as
You don't need lands in your deck, I think. I don't think it's important. You don't need them.
I think card draw... I think I've said this already, that it's probably the one where if you get it wrong, it will result in a bad game for you more often than I think anything else.
And you don't have fun, and this podcast is all about making you have better games of Commander and have more fun.
It's true. I think then probably ramp and removal sit at a similar level.
Yeah, if someone
and probably
casts...
lands as well, actually. They're kind of all roughly there, I reckon.
And I think one of the funnest things to do in the game of Commander is win, right?
Yes, and we are going to talk about how to win, because we're sort of combined these two together. I think we've mentioned them separately before, but it's sort of, they feel similar parts of your deck, even though they're kind of opposites. It's hard to explain, but win conditions and enhancers are going to be cards that we're going to want to include in our decks. We said before, specifically about win cons, we said we reckon 3 to 5 of these cards is good. So what do we mean when we talk about win con? What do you reckon, James?
Well, it's... In my opinion, a win con is a little bit more complex to describe because you're talking about how the deck wants to win as a whole.
Yes.
So in my opinion, you shouldn't have to cast a win con card or an enhancer card to have your deck win. The deck should get to its win con on its own without these cards. However, a win con card is... when you cast this spell, whatever it might be, a big X spell or an artifact or a creature or a meld synergy, which is something we've just recently endured. I think that if you resolve it, it either wins you the game or gets you incredibly close to winning. Might even eliminate a player or two.
Yes. I think I agree with you. I totally agree that our primary win con of the deck, unless we're talking about only a combo deck, should sit as a synergy with the 99 other cards, right?
Yeah, for sure.
We're talking about the deck is doing its thing, it's moving somewhere, and that's probably a win con.
Yeah.
But there are also going to be specific cards that bring us that win faster, right?
For example, combat decks in any capacity, whether they go tall or go wide, have a win con of combat damage, and even if they don't cast a win con card in the deck, which, as a quick example, Overwhelming Stampede is an incredible win con card in a combat-based deck. You basically buff every single creature on your board by X, where X is the greatest power among creatures on your board.
Yes, and it also gives them trample.
Which just gets the damage over the line anyway to win you the game. So a combat deck should have an Overwhelming Stampede in it if it's in green. It's 3 green, right?
3 green,
That's pretty good, right? Sorcery as well, so it's a hard combat trick to pull, but if you see someone cast an Overwhelming Stampede, you might be dead.
Yes, and it's also an example of the kind of thing that we were telling you would need to be countered, right?
Exactly.
If you're on the other side of the board, you got to counter these win cons as they come down. Obviously, the quintessential other green card for this is Craterhoof Behemoth.
I was so proud of myself when I put that in my Elf Ball deck just recently.
I remember you specifically told me that you had realized the power level of the deck when you put in Craterhoof. You were like, okay, I can't really call it janky anymore because now it's got this card where if I resolve it, I just kind of win.
What's even better than that, I now have a couple of tutors that we'll talk about later that get me that game-ending spell, so the deck has bumped its power level up purely by putting these synergies in, or this win con in, that just means it wins more consistently and gets to its win condition more consistently.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you don't have to be in green to have cards that are going to sort of up your win rate with these combat sort of strategies.
It does help. Having green in your commander's identity does help.
It definitely does. We've talked about a Chroma's Will before and how crazy good that card is.
Doesn't stop Brea's Thopters though, as we've learned.
Which is... No, it does. That's what we realized. We thought Breya's Thopters were the one thing that could block, but Breya's Thopters are blue.
That's so true.
So Chroma's Will, the key things... It does, like, everything, but the main things that it's going to do that are going to win the game for you is it gives your creatures lifelink, it gives them double strike, and it gives them protection from all colors. So protection from all colors means that protection has a few things that it does, but one of them is that if you have protection from all colors, your creatures have protection from all colors, they can't be blocked by colored creatures. Mm-hmm. So... spoiler, the game that we play has mostly colored creatures in it. So when you give your whole board protection from all creatures, you basically give them unblockable, right?
And we mistakenly, shout out to episode 1, by the way, because we talked about winning the game in great detail in episode 1.
We did.
The audio is terrible, so you can log onto our YouTube channel to find that terrible audio.
It's also on SoundCloud, which we're not uploading on anymore, but if you'd like to go down memory lane, it's there.
But we actually thought that Breya stopped this incredible synergy because you can block with the Thopters, but Breya's Thopters are blue, so you still get round Breya.
Specifically blue Thopters, yep. So yes, it'll get it through basically anywhere, and the double strike will mean that you probably win. But it doesn't have to be. If we're playing like a combat-y deck, or like a token deck, a go wide deck, we don't have to win through combat, right? We can have some win cons that they still are with the strategy of the deck of like making lots of creatures, but they don't have to be through combat. So we can play cards like Chiron Negotiations. Are you familiar with this card?
I think I've seen you resolve it, and I think after you resolved it, it was one of these things where I went, oh yeah, you win, well done.
Yeah, so basically it's 2 red for an enchantment.
Uh-huh.
You can tap an untapped... It might be artifact or creature, or it might just be creature. I can't recall. The main thing is it says creature on it. Mm-hmm. You can tap an untapped creature to deal 1 damage to target player.
Oh, I remember the situation now. It was just a board of untapped creatures. I think they also had vigilance, so you could swing with them, and then after combat, tap them all and ping a bunch of damage.
I definitely was playing it in my Krenko deck, and so it just became a thing of like, if I get like 60 goblins, it's like, I don't even need to attack you anymore. I can just tap them all, and you all die.
Terrifying.
It's going to win games. It's definitely going to win games for you. There's also a weird one that's kind of not quite as effective as immediately into the game, but definitely a similar vein. Glare of Subdual. Do you know this one?
This sounds like a white card, so I'm going to say no.
It includes the color white. It's 2 green-white for an enchantment.
Well, then of course I don't know it. It's Selesnya. I'm not going to know those cards.
You tap an untapped creature you control to tap target artifact or creature.
Oh, wow.
So basically,
in a token strat, you set aside 5 tokens to tap down all of your opponent's blockers.
Yes, and then you just go to combat, and it's it's like they're unblockable. So
can I shout out another token, kind of win conny card
of
that
course.
I'd have only just thought of? Goblin Bombardment.
Oh, yeah. That will totally do it as well.
And it's one of those cards that you can actually put down and leave because it's instant speed. So Goblin Bombardment is 1 and a red for an enchantment that says sacrifice a creature and deal 1 damage to any target. My favorite thing to do in my Fire Life deck is make 100 plants, cast this card and say pass.
Yeah.
Because then everyone knows that I've got a gun pointed at their head. If they decide at any point they want to try and win the game, I activate my win con, sacrifice my board and kill them.
Yes. There's something to be said for those instant speed win cons. Yeah. It's just like, try it. Try it.
Do it.
Yeah, I dare you.
It's over, Anakin. I have the high ground. That's the feeling of those cards.
It is the feeling.
But what about other deck strategies? For example, combo is one of my favorite deck strategies to play with. So obviously Curiosity is one of those combo cards that combos with my commander Niv Mizzet Perun in CEDH, and that is a win con card. But when I think about win con cards, I also like to think about some redundancies that I can run for them.
Yeah, and this is kind of what we're getting at when we say 3 to 5 win con cards, is it's like we said, if that's just a combo win con, then that's presumably the main thing you're aiming for. So you should have more than one way to reach that combo.
Exactly. So when I realized Curiosity went infinite with Niv Mizzet, and that's how I wanted to win the game with that commander deck, I was like, okay, right, jump on Scryfall. Shout out Scryfall again. Jump on Scryfall, have a look at at what reads the same text. And I found out there are 2 other cards that do the exact same thing. There's a Phidian Eye, which is a 2 and a blue for an enchantment aura with flash that does the exact same thing as Curiosity and loops with Niv Mizzet. Yep. I think we've mentioned this before, but for those unfamiliar with the Curiosity Niv Mizzet combo, basically Curiosity says whenever Niv Mizzet deals damage to a player, draw a card, and Niv Mizzet says whenever you draw a card, deal damage to any target.
So it becomes an infinite loop where James gets to draw his whole library, and if his library has more than the sum of life totals of his opponents, then he just pings damage everywhere. But as it's now a CDH deck, he also just runs like Thassa's Oracle. So at any point, he can target a creature with the draw trigger. And
or just Niv Mizzet himself as well, which is kind of handy. Even if I don't have something else to target.
Yeah, which just stops the loop instantly because he's not targeted a player, so he's not drawing a card anymore. And then, presumably you just stop once you find Thassa's Oracle or you get deep enough in the deck, right? And then at any point, if you cast another instant or sorcery, it starts the loop again if you want to. So very robust and simple combo, which is going to go a long way in CDH, obviously. Combos that was just like the commander and a card are generally the best combos in CDH because it's just like...
You've always got access to half of it. And then obviously the other half of it, so I've got Curiosity and Ophidian Eye. There's also Tandem Lookout, which is a creature card that basically does the exact same thing but through Soul Bond, which is a weird mechanic where you choose 2 creatures and they
become soul bond.
They get married, I guess.
Yes. It's a strange mechanic.
It's a weird mechanic that I hope doesn't get reprinted again because it's always tricky to explain.
It is, and it's tricky to keep track of as well. Yeah. Yes. So you've got redundancy is sort of the thing I was saying there. So that's your 3 win cons right there. And actually in CDH deck, you've actually got a couple of other win cons that we sort of talked about in the CDH episode. I think we talked about some of that as well. Absolutely. You're also going to have, in terms of combos, in mill decks where mill is your win con, like if we're talking about like a Phoenix deck, for instance, which is the one where your creatures tap and then they mill a player equal to their toughness.
So big booty tribal.
Yeah, big booty tribal. And the creatures that are going to be best in that deck are like the ones that get stronger for each card in your opponent's graveyards. Because then it's like, I mill 20 cards because it's 20 power. Now it's 40 power. I mill you for 40 cards. Like it just stacks up.
Shout out to Consuming Aberration.
Card is amazing. But you're also potentially going to want, like in a Bruvac deck, for instance, it's still mill. If you have Maddening Cacophony...
Oh, that's a combo win, right?
Yeah, you just win. Yeah. So Maddening Cacophony, I think you have to pay an extra amount, but it mills half of someone's library.
It's if it's kicked, it mills
that's
half your library. And obviously the combo here with Bruvac is Bruvac doubles the amount of mill that you put on your opponent.
Yes.
So if you mill half a library and you double half... You get 1 whole library gone.
I mill 1 library, please.
There's plenty of different win cons, though, to shout out some other favorites of mine. Spellslinger. Spellslinger is a super viable strategy in Commander these days, with so many commanders caring about instants and sorceries being cast. Magecraft from Strixhaven.
Yeah, copies are really good now. Copied spells with Magecraft become a lot better. Yeah.
So what are some win cons in this one? One of my favorite for Spellslinger is a big X spell. I love a Torment of Hailfire, a Crackle with Power, that kind of thing. But can you think of anything else that might be a win con?
Comet Storm definitely fits a similar sort of bill, but even stuff like Reiterate, like cards that copy your spells, often in conjunction with those X spells, can then become the win con, right?
Yeah, so, if you copy a Torment of Hailfire that was X equals 5 and you only have to pay 3 more mana or 2 more mana to actually make it X equals 10, you've saved mana and you've made your win con more efficient.
Yes, and often with these kinds of decks, you're going to have multiple ways to copy, and sometimes you can kind of stack them where it's like you have an ability that's kind of already active. Like you cast a spell that says the next instant or sorcery is copied, and then you cast a copy spell on your spell, like it becomes this like kind of crazy thing. You can even go for infinite copies of spells. It's totally a thing you can do. It's something I've done before.
Shout out to Dualcaster Mage.
Yes, Dualcaster Mage is so easy to accidentally do this with.
Yeah.
Like even if you're playing like a graveyard kind of deck, your win cons are going to look a little bit less combo-y than the couple that we just mentioned before, but you're still going to have them. Stuff like Command the Dreadhorde.
Oh, that if someone resolves a Command the Dreadhorde, it's close to game over.
Yeah, so
especially if there's a Grey Merchant of Asphodel in the bin.
Yeah, you can just do it again.
Yeah.
Command the Dreadhorde, basically you choose any number of creatures in graveyards. So even your opponent's graveyards, you can choose your graveyard as well. You lose life equal to their total mana value. So if you grab like a 1-drop, a 7-drop, and a 6-drop, you're going to take 14 damage.
Well, just called out a calculator so fast and typed in numbers so quickly. You guys didn't even hear the typing.
My eyes rolled in the back of my head. But basically, yeah, if that spell resolves and you've got enough life, you're just like, cool, I grab like the 8 best creatures on everyone's graveyards. You include a card that gains you some life as well, and you're like, cool, I'm fine. I'm not even on a low life total
Or a card
anymore.
that gives haste, and then you swing with those creatures and end the game. So, like, similar effects. Living Death is one of my favorite effects, because it really can... If your deck is designed to put your own creatures in the bin and then reanimate them, Living Death is a really weird card that basically says all the creatures on the battlefield are going to switch places with the creatures in your bin. It reads a little bit more elegantly than that on the card text.
It's just so the rules work, but basically all it does is swap your graveyard with your library.
It's kind of wild, and if you've designed your deck to win in a way that fills its graveyard and then just whoosh slams them all down, that is a really great win con card in your deck. That once it resolves, you're going to win.
In terms of like our sort of favorite cards that fit multiple slots as well, I totally count Living Death as a board wipe. Because it does just 100% to get rid of every single creature on the board.
That's good, and it's a good point. If you're playing a deck like... I'm thinking more in my Scarab God deck. It's a really great thing in Scarab God, because Scarab God exiles creature cards from other people's bins.
Yeah, so you're kind of reducing their ability to get those cards back.
Exactly,
right?
So if you've already taken all the creatures out of other people's bins and then cast Living Death... You're the only person with creatures left in the bin, so you're basically going to say, right, all your creatures swap with all the creatures in your bin. Oh, wait, sorry.
You lose everything, I get everything, I win. Yes. Again,
that's a win con.
You just win. You just win. Even, like, there's sort of more obscure ways of winning if you're playing, like, a wheel kind of deck where you're wanting to draw a bunch of cards in a row. Cards like Psychosis Crawler are going to be, like, a win con for you in that deck.
Yeah.
When you draw a card, if you have Psychosis Crawler on the battlefield, each of your opponents takes a damage. So, if you're wheeling and drawing 7 new cards...
That's a great redundancy effect in a Nekusar deck, for example.
Yeah, and that's going to stack with Nekusar too. So I think I hope you're getting the point here that, like, these cards are like alternatives to your main way of winning, but they're also just going to win by themselves. So they just provide more ways for you to close out the game, so you don't just sit there like synergizing for 2 hours and not getting anywhere.
I think that's something important to note, actually, when I referenced Nekusar. Obviously, if your commander is the win con, you don't have to run as many of these WinCon related cards.
Totally. You can count this as one of those 3 to 5 slots.
Exactly. So you could probably even count it as 2, because you get your commander back so easily.
Yeah.
You might be able to do the math in your brain for that. For example, Overwhelming Stampede was a card that we considered a WinCon card that we gushed about. If you're playing a Kamal, Heart of Krosa deck, you've got an Overwhelming Stampede in your command zone.
Totally. So and like you said, that's something you're always going to have access to. So yeah, you can bank on that as your win con card. And I think I would count that for 2 cards in my sort of win con section of my tags on Moxfield. Moxfield, we love you.
Please sponsor us.
Please sponsor us. But the other kind of card that we talked about in this sort of slot is enhancers. And these are kind of... I consider them as in a similar way, but they're sort of almost like the opposite, right? So these are cards that enhance your deck's ability to do the things it was already going to do.
How did I refer to it earlier? I think I referred to it as the nitrous oxide in the fuel tank.
Yeah.
It really turns that engine on and really gets it revving way quicker and just makes it go vroom, basically.
Exactly. But the really crucial thing here, and the reason we're recommending 5 of these maximum, is that they don't do anything on their own, right? If you have a tank of nitrous oxide and you don't have a car...
You've got a tank of liquid that does nothing.
You can make some vroom sounds, but that's about all you can do.
But with your own mouth. Don't put the nitrous oxide... Don't put the nitrous oxide in your own body. But like what Walt's saying here, I think, is these cards have an incredibly high ceiling. Incredibly high ceiling, but quite a low floor.
Yeah.
That they when they're doing their thing and when they're making your deck so good, they're making it fucking brilliant.
They're almost a win con sometimes, these cards. They're that good for your deck.
Sometimes you play it and that turn you win. So you could almost consider it a win con card in that condition. But when you play it and there's nothing going on or there's no synergy on your board, it's like playing what's that? Is it Darksteel Ingot or what's the 3-mana artifact that's just indestructible? That's the only.
That doesn't have any other.
It doesn't
abilities?
have any other text on it.
Oh, what is that?
A weird card. It's like
Darksteel something.
I think it is. It's literally just an artifact that just says indestructible. Does nothing.
It's so strange.
But like if you cast a Panharmonicon, for example, which I very strongly consider an enhancer.
Yes.
It doubles every single enter the battlefield effect you play. If you're not having anything enter the battlefield, that is a 4-mana artifact.
Yes, and unlike the cards that have the enter the battlefield effect, right? Those cards can do something on their own, but Panharmonicon cannot, right? So if you have your Reclamation Sage, the 3-mana elf druid, I think, that enters the battlefield, destroys an artifact or enchantment, if you have a Panharmonicon down, you get to do that twice. But if you have a Panharmonicon and no Reclamation Sage, you get nothing. Yeah. But if you have a Reclamation Sage but no Panharmonicon, you get to destroy one thing still. So
which is better than doing nothing.
It's a lot better than doing nothing. So we don't want too many of these, but we do want some because they're going to be so good, again, when we get the cards for them.
Like 2 cards that I'll give a shout out that are, in my opinion, enhancer cards that can go in literally any deck because they are artifacts is Strionic Resonator and Lithiform Engine. Strionic Resonator is a 2-mana artifact.
Yep.
You pay 2 and tap it, and you copy targeted triggered ability. So
activated or triggered.
Activated or triggered. So for example, you have an enter the battlefield effect. You can pay 2 and tap it and copy it. Or you activate Greed, which draws you some cards. You can actually pay 2 and copy it. You don't have to pay more life. You draw another card.
Yep.
It's a really incredible card. Lithiform Engine is a 4-mana artifact that has that exact same piece of text on it.
And 2 more lines of text and activated abilities.
Exactly, which is wild. This card is only 2 mana more. It is a little bit more expensive money-wise.
Yes.
But not that much more expensive mana-wise, which is probably why it's more expensive money-wise. When you think about it.
It makes sense.
But I think the other 2 abilities are that you can copy a target spell, like an
permanent spell. I think it says specifically copy target permanent spell.
Yes. Or no, the first one is copy target instant or sorcery spell, and then the last one is copy target permanent spell.
Yeah, no, you're totally right.
But like if you're not familiar with how this rules interaction works, you can copy a creature while it's on the stack. So while it hasn't even resolved yet, and it will enter the battlefield as a token copy, and then the original will enter.
Yes.
So you'll get a token copy, and then the original copy. So for example, a Reclamation Sage, if you copy the creature on the stack, it enters twice, you get 2 effects, but then with the ETB on the stack, you can tap your Strionic Resonator and double the trigger, and you can do 3 things! You can get 3 artifacts or enchantments. It's so good.
It gets out of hand really, really quickly. There's also cards like, again, like a wheel kind of deck, something like Teferi's Angel's Insight.
Oh, just doubles up your card draw?
Yeah, doubles your card draw, but not in your draw step. So this is not a card that's going to draw you cards unless you are already drawing cards. Yep. But yeah, again, if you're playing a deck where you're going to be drawing cards a lot, when you have this on the battlefield, this becomes like, every single one of those draws becomes 2. Even in a deck where you like draw 1 card, but you draw 1 card often. So like my Tygam deck, which has a bunch of cantrips in it.
Oh yeah, that's
those
really
cantrips
good.
Become two cards each, which is just like crazy better than 1.
Especially when you rebound them and then they're 2 cards for free.
Yes, I have like almost decked myself just with Teferi's Angel's Insight and casting a bunch of cantrips. It gets out of hand really quickly.
Do you think a Laboratory Maniac might need to be included in Tygam if you keep accidentally doing that?
I don't think I can do it. I just find that effect in general so boring, to be completely honest, the sort of lab man effects. But that's just me.
That's another win con though.
It is a win con, yes. You could totally count that in the win con slot. But yeah.
Another really good shout out in this category is Doubling Season in any token or counter based strategies.
Totally.
Basically doubles up tokens and counters.
Yep.
On the same card. It does both of them.
Yes. The reason that card is so much more expensive than Anointed Procession, and it's because it does the doubling tokens thing, but it also doubles the counters thing. So like both token decks and counter decks want it, and so the scarcity versus the demand is just like too much. It's like
also green, which
card.
Is usually, if you're doing either of those 2 things,
you're going to be in that color.
You're going to be in that color. So
that's true.
Another bit of a weird shout out that I think deserves its kind of own discussion in a long form format of the podcast, but clones. I think clones are an incredibly cool enhancer that you can make to your deck, especially if you're cloning really key creatures. Now, hear me out. EDHREC, my Tiger Shadow deck, right?
Yeah.
I run a couple of clone effects that clone EDHREC. I also run Strionic Resonator because it doubles trigger. But I run a couple of clone effects that make, like, Sakashima of 1,000 Faces, for example.
So that removes the legend rule. So the copy of EDHREC that you make, you don't have to sack to the legend rule, you just get to keep it.
Spark Double does the same thing.
Same thing.
But the reason why I run clones in the deck as enhancers is because when a ninja deals combat damage to a player, EDHREC says, right, reveal the top card of your library, each opponent loses life equal to the mana value. But if I have 2 EDHRECs, I do it twice.
Yeah, which is just going to be so much better.
Gets out of hand real quick.
Yeah, that's going to kill you really, really quickly. Yeah, no, totally agree. Clones are interesting. I think in general they're enhancers, but then in a clone's deck, they kind of are enhancers and they do other stuff, and it gets kind of weird where they fill a lot of slots then in a clone's deck.
Yeah, in a clone strategy, they're not an enhancer. They're part of your strategy, but they're also an enhancer. They can also be removal as well.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing to think about. Maybe we do an episode on cloning, but
maybe.
I want to stress again that enhancers are awesome to talk about. And we got really excited when we were talking about copying permanents on the stack and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, they're really cool. Just remember, though, these cards do nothing if you've got nothing else going on.
Yeah, they feel really bad to top deck. Like, if you have nothing going on and you have no cards in hand and you draw one of these cards, it feels so bad, right?
Especially
so
when
bad.
you want to draw... Let's say you're in a situation where there's a problem player going on and you draw an enhancer. You'd much rather draw a removal spell. Just for clarity, we spent nearly an hour and a bit talking about removals, and we're nearly done with this section after 15 minutes. So, like,
it's
you can
not
see...
integral relative to removal.
Yeah, you can see the comparison there of, what you need to include more of in your deck.
Totally. There's a couple of questions that I think you can ask yourself when you're looking at these enhancers and deciding which ones you want to play. The first one is kind of what we're already talking about, which is, what does this do on an empty board? Usually the answer is going to be nothing. That's fine, but just like know that, that's what's making it an enhancer. How many other cards does this directly synergize with is another question you're going to ask yourself. So, cards like the Fairy's Ageless Insight are going to be really, really good if you have lots of the draw effects, but if you're a deck that's not really drawing more cards than average, you're not going to be triggering that Teferi's Ageless Insight all that often. So you really need to look at your enhancer and go this needs to be a card that synergizes with a whole bunch of other cards. And so the third question is literally this. How many cards does this enhancer need before it becomes amazing? How many of those cards that synergize directly with this do I need to play in the deck before it becomes a great card in my deck?
That's a really good question. I'm actually trying to answer it in my head, and it's because I'm trying to think about all the different enhancers that I run in all my different decks, and it actually changes deck to deck. So these are actually questions that you need to ask yourselves. We can't give you an actual number on it because, for example, in an ETB deck, if you have 30 creatures that ETB and do something, Panharmonicon is awesome in that deck. But if you're in a deck that occasionally ETBs, maybe there is a bit of a sub-theme going on, but you only have 8 creatures that do it, are you really taking out a board wipe for a Panharmonicon? Are you really taking out a really good piece of card draw for Panharmonicon?
Yeah. You'd probably rather have one of those cards that's going to do something with the rest of your deck. That's going to, not the sub-theme kind of thing. Maybe that's a good thing to have in general. It's just your enhancer should be enhancing your main strategy, not a sub-theme. Because I think if you're starting to look at sub-themes of your deck and trying to enhance those, you're going to find those collections of cards together so rarely, right?
I completely agree. So, you can probably tell that we're pretty cynical about enhancers generally. I think that it's one of these things where if it is great, it's great, but if it's medium, it's terrible. The way I actually like to edit my decks, and we'll talk about this in playtesting when we get to that topic of discussion, but if someone says, why are you running this card? Or that card didn't do much that game, I immediately remove that card. It's almost like if someone is questioning why I'm running this and it's one of my enhancers, it's probably the answer is I'm running this probably because I was too excited at the prospect of it actually popping off.
Yeah, I think, I sort of mentioned earlier that I end up often when I'm building a deck, I start with about 115 cards and I sometimes just buy the deck in that form and then just shift things around as I want to. When I'm getting down to that 115, I think I cut enhancers more often than anything anything else.
For sure. You keep your favorite ones, for sure.
Yeah,
you keep
you
the
do.
ones that you get really excited to see, but
these are often going to be the cards where also you're probably hanging on to a thing you want your deck to do that is probably not going to do that well. I was playing for a long time in my Wizard tribal deck. I was playing Naban, Dean of Iteration. It's a wizard.
Is it really? In your wizard deck?
It's a wizard that doubles wizards ETBs.
So it's Panharmonicon for wizards.
For wizards. So, like, it sounds amazing, right? It's a 2-mana wizard. That sounds like absolutely outstanding.
Yep.
The problem is, there are not that many great wizards with ETBs.
Archaeomance is fantastic. Doubling that would be cool.
Yeah, really, really good. Fairy Seer, I think. Like, ETBs, you scry 2. Scrying 2 twice feels pretty good, too.
You can go 4 cards, 5 cards deep in your deck, technically. Like,
yeah.
That's wild.
The problem that I found myself running into was I had so many wizards with bad ETB effects because I was worried that Naban would not trigger. So, like, I was
you were, like, playing around that ETB.
I wanted him to be the enhancer so badly that I was like, I must include all these cards that will make him better. And the thing I realized recently is I took him out, and in the same, like, swoop, I could take out, like, 5 of my least favorite cards in the deck because I was like, wow, I was only playing these because they'd be good with Naban. Like, without Naban...
Like 5 cards.
Like, 5 wizards just, like, happened to have ETBs that were, like, a little bit relevant
like
some
what?
of
Like,
the
for
time.
example, what?
Like, there's a 4-mana 4-mana wizard that ETBs encounters an activated ability or something, or counters a triggered ability.
Why would you want to double that? Because usually... If
well, yeah, you can't even...
Yeah.
You can't... Wow. That's not even an example. Wow, I really hope that wasn't why I was playing that card, because that's totally bad.
That's a nombo. That's actually...
Oh, wow.
That's hilarious.
I was playing Venser, Shaper Savant, the one that ETBs and bounces a spell or permanent to its owner's hand. It's got Flash.
Mm-hmm.
So that with Naban down was like bounce 2 spells or bounce 2 permanents. That was kind of good, but it's also like a 4-mana wizard that does nothing else.
Do you run Baral? Baral wouldn't be a bad one to... Oh, no, that's not even an ETB. It's just
a cast
again,
trigger.
there's actually so many... There's, limited space for that card.
Very limited. And again, like, I freed up space for the stuff I really wanted my deck to be doing when I let go of that enhancer, because it just wasn't quite there.
And considering we've mentioned Kaza every episode, it's probably one of your favorite decks, right?
It's like, I tweak it probably more often than almost any other.
I'm so happy about this. I'm weirdly so proud that Walt's playing blue-red and playing with the blue-red deck more than anything else. That's so cool.
Speaking of blue-red, or speaking of color specifically... Hello, it's future James and Walt. It's after dark, I think, James.
It's after dark again, even though it's actually daytime right now when we're recording this.
It might be dark for you, but it's dark somewhere.
It's somewhere around the world.
It's definitely
currently dark.
But it's dark in our minds. Look, the point is...
It's us. We're jumping in a little bit here. This is way after we recorded the episode that you just listened to. But you know how we said that this would be a 2-part episode?
At the beginning of the first one of those, yes, we did say that.
Yeah, no, this is a 3-parter.
It's definitely 3 parts. There's so much left to cover in terms of deck building. Lands is a big one we haven't talked about yet.
I know, and you know that we can talk a long time about lands.
We definitely can, and we will, because we've done it already.
And we know that it needed to stretch out to 3 episodes, so
yes.
we don't want you to have to go through a full 4-hour podcast episode. So we'll split it up. So we're going to make sure that, we'll save all that, including tutors. We're going to talk about in the next episode.
Tutors. Lots to talk about as well in terms of play testing. We think that's really important, and you're going to hear all about it. So tune in next time. I guess we would normally planeswalk.
Yeah, but we've not done anything for the entire week other than write and record this podcast. So I've not really done anything outside the world of Magic.
The planeswalk is to like and subscribe.
Yeah, hit that bell.
Hit the bell. The Twitter, the Discord, all the links. Click every single link in the show notes.
Twiddle us on Twiddle.
Twiddle us.
Anyway, this is the outro. Thank you for listening to this episode, and we'll see you in the next one for the rest of the Complete Deck Building Guide, Part 3.
Part 3. See you soon.
Bye.